Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. I checked my phone to see a message that read, "I've been in your house all day." The words on the screen blurred for a moment as my brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing. A chill ran down my spine, and I instinctively looked around the room, scanning every corner, every shadow, as if the sender might suddenly reveal themselves. The message came from an unknown number, and my heart raced as I replayed the events of the day in my mind. Had I left any doors unlocked? Any windows open? I was certain I hadn't. The air in the room felt heavier, and I couldn't ignore the unsettling sense of being watched. My house was quiet, but the silence seemed unnatural, as though it was concealing something. I swallowed hard and got out of bed, clutching my phone tightly in my hand. I didn't want to believe the message, but I couldn't just ignore it. I decided to check the house room by room to reassure myself that I was alone. Starting with my bedroom, I checked the closet first, throwing the door open and scanning the small, cramped space. It was empty, as I expected, but that didn't ease my nerves. I moved to the bathroom next, flicking on the light and stepping inside. The mirror reflected my pale, frightened face, but there was nothing else out of the ordinary. I pulled back the shower curtain, holding my breath, but the tub was empty. I moved cautiously down the hallway, flipping on every light as I went. My living room was the same as I had left it, the couch and coffee table undisturbed. The kitchen was quiet, the counters free of any signs of intrusion. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house felt different, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows, confirming they were secure. Nothing appeared tampered with, and there were no signs of forced entry. I even checked the back door, the one I always made sure to lock before bed. It was still locked, just as I had left it. I tried to convince myself that the message was some kind of prank, maybe a wrong number, but the uneasy feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I returned to my phone, staring at the message again, as if the words might change or reveal some clue. My fingers hovered over the screen, debating whether to reply or block the number. After a moment of hesitation, I decided to respond. I typed, "Who is this?" and hit send, my hand shaking slightly. The seconds felt like hours as I waited for a reply, my heart pounding with every passing moment. The response came almost immediately. "You didn't even notice me," it read. My breath hitched, and my vision blurred as fear gripped me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Could someone have been here while I was home? I thought back to earlier in the day. I had spent most of it working, moving between my bedroom and the living room. I hadn't heard or seen anything unusual, but now I was questioning every moment, every sound I had dismissed. I decided to check the security cameras. I had installed them months ago for peace of mind, but I rarely ever checked the footage. I grabbed my laptop and opened the app, scrolling through the recordings from earlier in the day. At first, everything seemed normal, just me moving around the house, going about my routine. But then I noticed something. Around mid-afternoon, there was a brief moment where the camera in the hallway picked up movement. I paused the footage and rewound it, my heart racing as I watched. There, in the corner of the frame, was a figure. They were barely visible, just a shadow slipping out of view as I walked past the hallway. I rewound the footage again, watching in disbelief. Whoever it was had been there, standing just out of sight as I moved through the house. My stomach churned, and I felt an overwhelming urge to leave, to get out of the house as quickly as possible. I grabbed my keys and headed for the front door, but as I reached for the handle, my phone buzzed again. I glanced down at the screen, and another message popped up. "Leaving won't help," it read. My hand froze on the doorknob, and my knees felt weak. How did they know I was about to leave? Were they watching me right now? I turned around slowly, scanning the room, but I couldn't see anything or anyone. I backed away from the door, my mind spinning. If they were watching me, they had to be close. I decided to call the police. My hands shook as I dialed, and I could barely get the words out when the dispatcher answered. I told them about the messages, about the figure on the security camera, and they assured me an officer would be on the way. I hung up and sat down on the couch, clutching my phone tightly and trying to calm my breathing. The minutes stretched on endlessly as I waited for the police to arrive. I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting another message, but none came. When the officers finally knocked on the door, I practically ran to let them in. I explained everything to them, showing them the messages and the footage from the security camera. They searched the house thoroughly, checking every room, every closet, and every possible hiding place. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been inside. The messages, they said, could have been sent by someone who knew me, someone trying to scare me. They suggested I change my locks and consider staying somewhere else for a few days. I thanked them and watched as they drove away, the flashing lights of their patrol car disappearing into the night. I locked the door behind them and sat down on the couch, feeling both relieved and uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that the person who sent those messages wasn't done with me. As the night wore on, I tried to distract myself, but every sound, every shadow made me jump. I eventually fell asleep on the couch, too afraid to go back to my bedroom. The next morning, I woke up to find another message on my phone. "You can't hide forever," it read. My blood ran cold, but this time I wasn't going to let fear control me. I called the locksmith to change all the locks and installed additional security measures around the house. I even reached out to a friend, asking if I could stay with them for a few days. As I packed a bag and prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. But this time, I didn't let it stop me. I locked the door behind me, got in my car, and drove away, vowing to do whatever it took to reclaim my sense of safety. I didn't know who was behind the messages or why they had targeted me, but I wasn't going to let them win. This was my home, and I would fight to feel secure in it again. Story 2. I was tidying up my living room when I decided to do a more thorough cleaning than usual. The couch had been there for years, and while I vacuumed and wiped its surface regularly, I rarely checked underneath. Something about that day compelled me to crouch down and take a look. As I peered under the couch, I froze. There was something there, an object I did not recognize. It was small and partially obscured by the shadow of the couch. I reached out hesitantly, my fingers brushing against its cold, metallic surface. Pulling it out, I saw it was a silver pocket watch, tarnished around the edges but still functional. Its cover had intricate engravings that I could not decipher, but they looked old, almost antique. I turned it over in my hands, trying to piece together where it could have come from. I had never owned anything like it, nor could I remember seeing it before. I sat back on my heels, my heart racing slightly. My first thought was that it might have belonged to someone who had visited me in the past, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I rarely had guests, and even if I did, why would someone leave a pocket watch under my couch? The idea felt absurd. I traced my fingers along the engravings, feeling the grooves as if they might give me some clue. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the cover. Inside was a small, circular photograph, a faded image of a young couple standing together, smiling faintly at the camera. The photograph was old, judging by the sepia tones and the style of their clothing. They looked like they were from another time, another era entirely. I stared at the picture for a long moment, trying to place them, but they were complete strangers to me. The pocket watch ticked faintly in my hand, its mechanism still working despite its age. I set it on the table and checked my couch again, searching for any other signs of something out of place. There was nothing else, no other objects, no notes, nothing to suggest how the watch had ended up there. My mind raced with questions. Who did it belong to? How long had it been there? And why was it so perfectly hidden under my couch, as if waiting for me to find it? I considered the possibility that I had overlooked it during previous cleanings, but that thought did not sit well with me. I was thorough, and I would have noticed something like this. The watch did not feel like an accidental discovery. It felt deliberate, like it had been placed there intentionally for me to find. As the evening wore on, I found myself unable to focus on anything else. The watch sat on the coffee table, its faint ticking filling the silence of the room. The photograph inside continued to haunt me. Who were those people? Why did I feel an odd sense of familiarity when I looked at them? It was as though the watch carried some kind of weight, an unspoken story I could not yet understand. I decided to search the internet for any information that might help. I typed descriptions of the watch and the engravings into a search engine, hoping to find something similar. After scrolling through countless images, I found a design that matched the engravings almost perfectly. According to the website, it was a limited edition piece crafted over a century ago. My heart sank. If the watch was that old, then how had it ended up under my couch? I dug deeper, reading about the history of the pocket watch. It was said to have been a gift given to couples as a token of eternal love. The website mentioned that only a handful of these watches were ever made, and they were incredibly rare. The more I read, the more uneasy I felt. This was no ordinary item. It had a history, a purpose, and now it was in my possession for reasons I could not explain. Sleep did not come easily that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the faint ticking of the watch echoing in my ears. My mind replayed the discovery over and over, each time adding new layers of doubt and unease. By morning, I decided I could not keep it in the house any longer. Something about it felt wrong, intrusive, like it did not belong to me. I placed the watch in a small box and left it on my front porch. My plan was to donate it to a thrift store or hand it over to the authorities, but as the day went on, I found myself hesitating. What if it had been left for me for a reason? What if getting rid of it would invite more questions, or worse, more problems? When I finally mustered the courage to return to the porch, the box was gone. My stomach dropped. I had not heard anyone approach, and I had not seen anyone nearby. The thought of someone taking it without my knowledge was unsettling. Who had taken it? And why had they come so quickly, as if they were waiting for me to put it outside? That night I double-checked all the locks on my doors and windows. I could not shake the feeling that someone had been watching me, someone who knew about the watch and its significance. The thought left me restless, every creak and groan of the house amplifying my anxiety. Days passed, and life seemed to return to normal, but I still felt the weight of the watch's mystery. I could not help but glance at the spot under the couch where I had found it, half expecting to see it there again. Though the watch was gone, its presence lingered, a quiet reminder of the strange events that had unfolded. I never found out who left the watch or why it was there, but the experience stayed with me. It made me question the things I overlooked, the hidden corners of my life that might hold secrets I was not ready to uncover. And though I would never admit it out loud, part of me still felt like the watch and the story it carried was not entirely gone. Story 3. I woke up to the pale morning light streaming through the window, but something felt off. The air in the house was still, almost unnervingly so, and an unshakable sense of unease gnawed at me. As I made my way to the kitchen, the feeling intensified. My footsteps echoed faintly on the floor as I entered the room, and that was when I saw a piece of paper, perfectly centered on the kitchen counter. It was a small, crisp note, the handwriting neat and deliberate. The words on it sent a chill through me. "I'll be back soon." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My first thought was that someone had been in the house. But how? I had locked the doors and windows before going to bed, as I always did. The note wasn't mine. I hadn't left it there, and I hadn't let anyone in. I stood there, staring at the note, my mind racing. The handwriting wasn't familiar, and there was no signature, no hint of who had written it. My immediate instinct was to check the rest of the house. I grabbed a heavy object, a rolling pin from the counter, and began to cautiously walk through each room. My heart pounded with each step, and I strained my ears for any sound, any movement that might indicate someone was still inside. I checked the living room, the bedrooms, the bathroom. Everything was exactly where it should be. There were no signs of forced entry, no open windows, no misplaced objects. It was as if the note had appeared out of thin air. Still, the thought that someone could have been inside while I was sleeping made my skin crawl. I went back to the kitchen and picked up the note, examining it more closely. The paper was plain, nothing distinctive about it. The handwriting was careful but unfamiliar, neither rushed nor messy. It was as though whoever had written it wanted to make sure it would be easily read. But the message itself was what unnerved me most. "I'll be back soon." Was it a threat, a warning, or something else entirely? I checked the locks on the doors and windows again, double-checking them this time. They were all secure, just as they had been when I went to bed. That didn't make sense. If someone had gotten inside, they would have had to bypass the locks or find another way in. And if they had, why would they leave a note and nothing else? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some sort of prank. Maybe someone had gotten in and left the note to scare me. But why? And how? The more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. I couldn't ignore the possibility that whoever had left the note might come back, just as they had promised. I decided to check the security cameras. I had installed them a few months ago after hearing about break-ins in the area. Pulling up the footage on my phone, I scrolled through the recordings from the night before. At first, everything seemed normal. There was no movement, no unusual activity. But then, around 3 in the morning, I saw it. The footage showed the kitchen, dimly lit by the faint glow of the streetlights outside. At exactly 3:15, the screen flickered slightly, and then the note was there. No one had walked into the frame. No one had placed it. It just appeared, as if by magic. My stomach churned as I rewound the footage, watching it again and again, hoping I had missed something. But no matter how many times I replayed it, the result was the same. The note simply appeared. I put my phone down, my hands trembling. None of this made sense. I was wide awake now, every nerve on edge. I didn't know what to do. Should I call someone? The police? What could I even tell them? That a note had appeared in my locked house without explanation. I doubted they would take me seriously. The rest of the day passed in a haze of anxiety. I couldn't focus on anything. Every small noise made me jump, and I kept glancing at the doors and windows, half expecting someone to walk through them. I moved the note to a drawer, hoping that putting it out of sight would make me feel better, but the words were burned into my mind. As evening approached, I decided to stay elsewhere for the night. I packed a small bag and drove to a friend's house, explaining that I had been feeling uneasy and needed a change of scenery. I didn't mention the note. I didn't want to sound paranoid. The night at my friend's house was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I returned home the next morning, my heart sank the moment I walked through the door. On the kitchen counter, in the exact same spot as before, was another note. This one was slightly different. The handwriting was the same, but the message had changed. It now read, "Why did you leave?" My hand shook as I picked it up, the paper feeling heavier than it should have. This wasn't just a prank. Someone was playing a game with me, and I had no idea who or why. I called a locksmith immediately, explaining that I needed all the locks in the house changed. I also contacted the security company to upgrade my system, adding more cameras and motion sensors. As the locksmith worked, I stayed on edge, watching every movement, every shadow. That night, I stayed up, determined not to sleep. I wanted to catch whoever was doing this. I sat in the living room with the lights on, my phone in one hand and a heavy flashlight in the other. The hours dragged on, and nothing happened. No noises, no strange activity. But at exactly 3:15, my phone buzzed with a notification from the security camera app. My heart raced as I opened it, dreading what I might see. The live feed showed the kitchen, and there was the note, now with a new message: "You cannot stop me." I bolted to the kitchen, but it was empty. The note was there, just as the camera had shown, but there was no sign of anyone. My blood ran cold as I realized that whoever or whatever was doing this wasn't bound by the normal rules of the world. I don't know what they wanted or why they had chosen me, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I packed my belongings and left that day, determined never to return. I sold the house within weeks, not caring about the financial loss. Even now, in a new place, far away from where it all began, I sometimes find myself waking up in the middle of the night, certain I'll find another note waiting for me. So far, there's been nothing. But every time I see a blank piece of paper, I feel a pang of dread, wondering if the message will return. Story 4. I checked my doorbell camera to see a shadow standing in front of my house for hours. The figure was eerily still, barely moving except for the occasional shift in its stance. My heart sank as I rewound the footage, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The timestamp confirmed it had been there for at least 3 hours, standing just beyond the light cast by the porch. It was close enough to be unnerving, but far enough to obscure any defining features. The longer I watched, the more unsettled I became. The shadow didn't behave like a person waiting for something. It didn't knock on the door, move closer, or even leave. It just stood there, as if it was waiting for me to notice it. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen, unable to look away. Who would stand outside someone's house like that, so still, so deliberate? I couldn't shake the feeling that it knew I was watching now. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was a neighbor, someone lost, or a prank gone wrong. But deep down, I knew that none of those explanations felt right. There was something about the stillness, the way it lingered in the darkness, that made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone to call anyone, but my hand froze mid-dial. What would I even say? That a shadow had been standing outside for hours. It sounded ridiculous, like something out of a bad horror movie. Still, I couldn't ignore it. I decided to check the front window, hoping to confirm that the figure was gone. Slowly, I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds, my breath shallow. The yard was empty, the street quiet. There was no one there now. But the unease didn't leave me. If anything, it grew stronger. I went back to the camera footage and rewound it again, staring at the screen, trying to catch any detail I might have missed. It was then that I noticed something even more disturbing. The shadow had moved closer at some point. What I initially thought was it standing at the edge of the yard wasn't entirely true. Over the course of the footage, it had inched forward almost imperceptibly. By the time it disappeared, it had been standing just a few feet from the door. My throat tightened as I realized how close it had come. Why hadn't I heard anything? No footsteps, no creaking floorboards, nothing. I checked the locks on the front door, then double-checked them, my hands trembling. I couldn't let my guard down. I turned on every light in the house, trying to push back the growing darkness outside. But even with the lights, the house felt cold, as if the shadow had left something behind. My mind raced with questions. Who or what had been outside my home? Why had it been standing there, and why had it left without doing anything? None of it made sense. I decided to stay up for the rest of the night. I couldn't bring myself to sleep, not after what I had seen. I sat in the living room with the doorbell camera feed open on my phone, watching the live footage, scanning for any sign of movement. The hours dragged by, each one slower than the last. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside, sent my heart racing. But nothing else happened. The yard stayed empty, the street silent. When morning finally came, I tried to shake off the events of the night. I told myself it was probably nothing, just a weird occurrence that didn't mean anything. But the pit in my stomach didn't go away. I couldn't stop thinking about the shadow, the way it had stood there for hours, so close to my door. I decided to share the footage with someone else, hoping they could help make sense of it. I sent the video to a friend, explaining what had happened. They agreed it was strange, but tried to reassure me that it was likely nothing serious. Maybe a drunk person, they said, or someone lost in the neighborhood. I nodded, pretending to agree, but their words didn't ease my fear. Deep down, I knew this wasn't just a random incident. It felt deliberate, targeted, as if the shadow had been there for a reason. That evening, I hesitated before turning off the lights. I checked the locks again, my eyes darting to the doorbell camera feed every few minutes. The house was silent, the night stretching on endlessly. My nerves were on edge, every small sound amplified in the stillness. I told myself it would be fine, that nothing would happen. But as the hours ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was still out there, watching, waiting. Days passed, and nothing unusual happened. I started to feel a bit more at ease, though the memory of that night lingered in the back of my mind. I tried to go about my routine, focusing on work and other tasks, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I found myself glancing at the doorbell camera more often, checking the footage even when there was no reason to. It had become a habit, a way to reassure myself that everything was normal. One evening, as I sat in the living room, I decided to review the footage from the past few nights. I wasn't expecting to find anything. It was more out of curiosity than anything else. But as I scrolled through the recordings, my heart stopped. There, in the corner of the screen, was the shadow. It had returned. This time, it didn't linger at the edge of the yard. It stood directly in front of the camera, as if it wanted me to see it. The shadow didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was just there, its presence filling the screen with an oppressive darkness. I stared at the footage, my blood running cold. The timestamp showed it had been there for hours again, just standing, watching. My breath caught in my throat as I realized something even more chilling. This time the shadow had been closer. It wasn't just outside the door, it was on the porch, inches away from the camera. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, but nothing felt right. Calling someone seemed pointless. What could I say that wouldn't make me sound crazy? I decided to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and wait for morning. As the night dragged on, I sat in the living room, clutching my phone, my eyes glued to the doorbell feed. The shadow never moved, never left. It stayed there, a silent reminder that it could come closer if it wanted to. When the first rays of sunlight broke through the windows, I checked the camera again. The shadow was gone. I didn't feel relief, though. Its absence felt more ominous than its presence. It had left, but not because it was done. It felt like a warning, a reminder that it could return at any time. I didn't know what it wanted or why it was targeting me, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. The shadow wasn't gone for good. It was waiting. Story 5. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, the sinking sun cast long shadows across the yard. I was eager to get inside after a long day, but as I approached the front door, I froze. It was open, not just unlocked or slightly ajar, but wide open, the door yawning into the dim interior of my house. My heart dropped into my stomach. I knew I had locked it before leaving. I always double-checked, a habit born of years of cautiousness. I stood there for a moment, my keys clenched tightly in my hand, staring at the open door. The breeze shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of the outdoors and something off. It was faint but unsettling, like the faint trace of something rotting. My mind raced through possibilities. Had I been in such a rush that I forgot to lock it? Had someone broken in? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but every instinct told me something wasn't right. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the porch, my footsteps heavy on the wooden planks. The door creaked slightly as I pushed it fully open, and I leaned inside cautiously. The house was quiet, eerily so. Everything seemed to be in place at first glance, the furniture undisturbed, the lights still off just as I had left them. But that unsettling smell lingered, faint but noticeable, as if something had been left out too long. I reached for the light switch, flipping it on, and the entryway flooded with light. My eyes darted around, scanning for anything out of place. The silence was oppressive, amplifying the sound of my breathing and the slight creak of the floor as I stepped further inside. My keys, still clutched tightly in my hand, felt like a lifeline, though I knew they were useless for protection. I set my bag down slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible, listening intently for any sign that I wasn't alone. The living room was exactly as I had left it, down to the neatly folded blanket on the couch and the empty coffee mug on the table. I walked through the kitchen, my shoes clicking softly against the tile floor. Nothing seemed out of place here either. The back door was still locked, the windows all closed. But the smell was stronger here, like something had been left out to spoil, though I couldn't see anything unusual. I opened the pantry and the fridge, half expecting to find something rotting, but everything was in order. The smell wasn't coming from the kitchen, and that realization sent a chill down my spine. It was coming from somewhere else, deeper in the house. I hesitated, my hand gripping the edge of the counter as I tried to steady my breathing. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and leave, to call for help, but I needed to know. I needed to be sure. I moved toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms, each step feeling heavier than the last. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the windows. I flipped the switch, and the overhead light flickered once before coming on, casting the yellowish glow over the narrow space. The smell was stronger here, almost metallic, and it made my stomach churn. The first bedroom door was closed, just as I had left it. I opened it cautiously, peering inside. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The bed was neatly made, the closet doors shut. I stepped back into the hallway and moved to the next room, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The door to the second bedroom was slightly ajar, and as I reached for the handle, I hesitated. The smell was strongest here, wafting out like a warning. I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. The room was dark, the curtains drawn. But even in the dim light, I could see that something was wrong. The bed had been disturbed, the covers rumpled and tossed aside as if someone had been lying there recently. On the floor near the foot of the bed was a strange dark stain, irregular in shape and glossy in the faint light. My throat tightened, and I took a step back instinctively. I fumbled for the light switch, my hands trembling, and when the light came on, I froze. The stain was a deep, dark red, seeping into the carpet. It was fresh. My mind raced to comprehend what I was seeing, but no explanation came. I looked around the room, searching for any other signs of intrusion, and that was when I saw a single shoe print, faint but distinct, leading out of the room and down the hallway. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the shoe print was too large to be mine. Whoever had been here wasn't just in the house, they had been in this room, possibly while I was still standing at the front door. I backed out of the room slowly, my eyes fixed on the hallway, and that was when I heard a soft creak coming from the living room, as if someone had just shifted their weight on the floorboards. I froze, my mind screaming at me to move, to run, but my body felt paralyzed. The sound came again, this time closer, and I knew I couldn't stay. I turned and bolted down the hallway, grabbing my phone from the counter as I ran toward the front door. I didn't look back, didn't dare to, as I sprinted out into the night, leaving the door wide open behind me. Once outside, I fumbled with my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed for help. The operator's voice was calm and steady, a stark contrast to the panic in mine as I explained what had happened. They assured me that officers were on their way, and I stood in the driveway, my eyes fixed on the house, waiting. Every shadow, every flicker of movement in the windows made my heart race. When the police arrived, they searched the house thoroughly. They found no one inside, no sign of forced entry, and no explanation for the strange stain on the carpet or the open door. The officers reassured me that they would continue to investigate, but as they left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The house felt different now, its familiar walls and rooms tainted by an unshakable sense of unease. I locked the door that night, triple-checking it before I finally went to bed. But sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind outside, kept me wide awake, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't forget the sound of those footsteps or the sight of that stain. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that whoever was in my house that night wasn't just passing through, they were waiting for me to come home. Story 6. I woke to the faint sound of tapping, rhythmic and persistent, coming from my bedroom window. My heart thudded in my chest as I lay frozen under the covers, listening to the sound continue in slow, deliberate beats. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong in the stillness of the night, piercing through the quiet like an unwelcome visitor. The clock on my nightstand showed 2:15 in the morning, and the faint glow of the moon barely illuminated the room. I didn't want to move, but curiosity and unease gnawed at me, forcing me to sit up and glance toward the window. The blinds were drawn, but I could see their faint sway as if something or someone was brushing against them from the outside. My breath caught as the tapping continued, sharp and deliberate, like the person on the other side wanted me to know they were there. I forced myself to move, each step toward the window feeling heavier than the last. My hand trembled as I reached for the blinds, hesitating for a moment. Part of me wanted to turn away, to crawl back into bed and pretend I had imagined it all, but I couldn't ignore the sound. Slowly, I pulled the blinds aside and peered out into the night. The backyard was empty. The pale light of the moon illuminated the grass, the fence, and the row of trees at the edge of the property, but there was no sign of anyone. I scanned the yard carefully, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow, but the stillness outside only deepened the unease in my chest. The tapping had stopped the moment I pulled the blinds aside, as if whoever or whatever had been there knew I was watching. I stared into the darkness for a while, trying to convince myself that it must have been the wind, a tree branch brushing against the glass, or maybe even an animal. But the rhythm of the tapping had been too deliberate, too human. I closed the blinds and stepped back, my heart still racing as I turned on the bedside lamp, flooding the room with a warm, reassuring glow. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I considered checking the rest of the house, but the thought of walking through the dark hallways made my stomach churn. Instead, I reached for my phone and opened the app linked to my security cameras. I rewound the footage from the last hour, scanning for anything unusual. As I watched, I saw nothing at first, just the quiet stillness of the yard, the trees swaying gently in the breeze. But then, at 2:12, a shadow appeared at the edge of the camera's view. The figure was tall and indistinct, blending into the darkness as they moved closer to the house. My stomach tightened as I watched them approach my window, their movements slow and deliberate. They stopped just outside the camera's range, leaving only the faint outline of their figure visible. I could see the motion of their arm as they reached out, their hand tapping against the glass in that same rhythmic pattern I had heard. The tapping continued for nearly a minute before the figure turned and disappeared back into the shadows. I stared at the screen, my hands clammy as I rewound the footage and watched it again, hoping I had missed something that would explain it. But there was no mistaking it. Someone had been at my window watching me. The thought made my skin crawl, and I quickly checked the locks on my bedroom door and window, ensuring everything was secure. I didn't know who they were or what they wanted, but I knew one thing for sure: they had been there for me. I barely slept for the rest of the night, my ears straining for any sound, any indication that they had returned. The house was eerily silent, each creak and groan of the old wood setting my nerves on edge. By the time the sun began to rise, I was still sitting upright in bed, the glow of the security footage still illuminating the screen of my phone. There had been no further movement, no sign of the figure returning, but the unease lingered like a shadow in the back of my mind. As the day wore on, I debated what to do. Calling the police felt like the logical step, but what could I tell them? That someone had tapped on my window in the middle of the night and then disappeared. The footage was unsettling, but it didn't show anything concrete, just a shadowy figure that could have been anyone. Still, I decided to file a report, hoping it would at least put me at ease. The officer I spoke to was polite but non-committal, promising to send a patrol car through the neighborhood that evening. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. That night, I went to bed with every light in the house turned on, my phone and a flashlight within arm's reach. I tried to convince myself that it was over, that whoever had been there wouldn't come back. But as the hours passed, the unease in my chest grew heavier, my mind replaying the sound of the tapping over and over again. I didn't think I would ever forget it, the deliberate, calculated rhythm that seemed designed to unnerve me. At exactly 2:15, I heard it again. The tapping was softer this time, almost hesitant, as if whoever was out there wanted to test my reaction. My heart pounded as I sat up in bed, staring at the window. The blinds swayed faintly, the same as they had the night before, and I could feel the weight of the presence on the other side. This time I didn't move. I stayed perfectly still, watching the blinds as the tapping continued, steady and deliberate. After what felt like an eternity, the tapping stopped. I waited, holding my breath, but no other sound followed. Slowly, I reached for my phone and opened the security app, pulling up the live feed from the cameras. My stomach dropped as I saw the figure standing in the yard, just outside the glow of the porch light. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching the house. Their face was obscured, their features impossible to make out in the darkness, but I could feel their gaze like a weight pressing down on me. I didn't hesitate this time. I called 911, my voice shaking as I explained what was happening. The dispatcher assured me that an officer was on the way, but the minutes felt like hours as I waited, my eyes glued to the camera feed. The figure remained in the yard, unmoving, until the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. As the patrol car pulled into view, the figure turned and disappeared into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. The officers searched the yard and the surrounding area but found no sign of the intruder. They told me to keep my doors and windows locked and to call again if anything happened. It wasn't exactly comforting, but it was all they could do. As I watched them drive away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Whoever was out there knew where I lived, and they had made it clear that they weren't afraid to come back. For now, all I could do was wait. Story 7. I was sipping my morning coffee when the notification for a new email popped up on my laptop. It was early, the sun had barely risen, and the house was still bathed in the dim, cool light of dawn. I was only half awake, scrolling absent-mindedly through my inbox when the subject line of one particular email caught my eye. It read, "I see you." At first, I thought it was spam. My inbox was no stranger to weird, unsolicited emails, and most of the time I just deleted them without a second thought. But this one was different. There was no advertisement, no attachment, and the sender's address was a random combination of numbers and letters. Something about it felt deliberate. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The email was short and simple, but every word made my stomach twist. It read, "I am watching you from across the street. You looked lovely this morning." I blinked at the screen, rereading the sentence over and over, hoping I had misunderstood. My heart began to pound as I looked around the room, suddenly hyper-aware of my surroundings. I lived alone in a small, quiet neighborhood where nothing ever happened. My street was lined with identical houses, each with manicured lawns and neat driveways. The thought of someone watching me from one of those houses felt surreal and invasive. My first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank. Maybe someone was trying to scare me for fun, or it was some kind of elaborate scam. But the mention of this morning sent a chill down my spine. How could anyone know what I looked like today unless they had seen me? I stood up and moved to the window, peering out cautiously. The street was empty, just as it always was this time of day. The houses across the road looked quiet and lifeless, their curtains drawn, their driveways empty. I scanned every window, every shadow, searching for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. Trying to calm myself, I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe the sender was bluffing. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. I decided to delete the email and forget about it, but even as I closed my laptop, the words lingered in my mind. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but I couldn't focus. Every time I glanced out the window, I felt a pair of unseen eyes on me. I started to doubt myself, questioning whether I was being paranoid. By the time the sun set, I had convinced myself that it was all in my head. That is, until I received another email. This one arrived just after 8 in the evening. The subject line simply read, "Nice curtains." My blood ran cold as I opened it. The body of the email was even shorter than the first. "You forgot to close them tonight." My hand trembled as I glanced at the window. The curtains were indeed open, and beyond them, the streetlights cast long, eerie shadows across the empty road. I rushed to close them, my heart pounding in my chest. Whoever this was, they had to be close. They were watching me, and they knew my habits. I locked the door and checked all the windows, making sure everything was secure. My cozy little house, which had always felt so safe, now felt like a prison. I debated whether to call the police, but what could I tell them? That I had received a couple of creepy emails. There was no proof that anything illegal had happened, and I doubted they could trace such a vague email address. Instead, I spent the night glued to my security camera feed, watching every angle of the house, but I didn't see anything unusual. The following morning, I woke up groggy and on edge. My laptop sat on the coffee table where I had left it, and for a moment, I hesitated to open it. But curiosity got the better of me. There was another email waiting for me. This one read, "Did you sleep well?" My stomach churned as I read it. They had to know I stayed up all night. Were they watching me inside the house? I glanced around, scanning the room for any hidden cameras or listening devices, but everything looked normal. Still, I couldn't ignore the growing fear that my privacy had been violated in some way. That day, I decided to stay home and keep my curtains closed. I even avoided turning on the lights, worried that they might give away my position inside the house. But the emails kept coming. Each one was more unsettling than the last. "Why are you hiding?" One read. Another said, "I can see you, even when you can't see me." I tried to reply, demanding to know who they were and what they wanted, but the emails bounced back. The address didn't exist, or at least, not in any way I could trace. It was like they were taunting me, enjoying the fear they were causing. As night fell again, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and drove to a friend's house, too scared to stay alone. I didn't tell them the full story, just that I had been receiving some strange messages and needed a place to stay for a while. They agreed without hesitation, and for the first time in days I felt a small sense of relief. But even at their house, the emails followed me. The first one I received their read, "Running won't help." I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized they knew where I was. It didn't make any sense. How could they be watching me here? I hadn't told anyone where I was going, not even over the phone. That night, I barely slept. Every noise, every creak of the house made me jump. I kept checking the windows, expecting to see someone standing outside, but there was never anyone there. When morning came, I knew I had to do something. I went to the police and showed them the emails. They listened politely but seemed unconvinced. Without any clear evidence or threats, there wasn't much they could do. They told me to stay vigilant and report anything suspicious, but their reassurances felt hollow. I left the station feeling more helpless than ever. The emails eventually stopped, but the fear never fully went away. I moved to a different neighborhood, changed my email address, and tried to put the whole experience behind me. But every so often I still catch myself glancing out the window, half expecting to see someone staring back at me. Story 8. I had just gotten out of the shower, the steam hanging thick in the air, and I was reaching for my towel when I noticed it. At first, I thought it was just condensation, the usual foggy pattern that forms on the mirror after a hot shower. But then, I saw a message slowly emerging from the mist, written in something that wasn't water. It was like the words were being etched into the mirror itself, fading into view as the steam continued to settle. I leaned closer, squinting to make sense of it. The words read, "I know where you sleep." My stomach dropped, a cold shiver running down my spine. My heart hammered in my chest, and I quickly stepped back, my mind racing. How could this happen? How was this even possible? There was no one else in the house, and I had been the only one in the bathroom. Yet, there it was clear as day, a message meant for me. I quickly turned off the shower, wiping away the fog from the mirror with my hand, but the words didn't vanish. They remained, as if someone had written them in some invisible ink that appeared only when exposed to the steam. My reflection stared back at me, but it was distorted in the condensation, a blurry figure whose eyes seemed to widen the longer I stood there, frozen in place. My thoughts raced, spinning in every direction. Who would do this? How did they get into my house? I hadn't heard anything strange. No footsteps, no creaks in the floorboards. The only sound had been the water running, the quiet hum of the shower. But now the silence felt oppressive, suffocating. I felt trapped, cornered by something unseen, something that knew more about me than I was comfortable with. I took a few steps back, my hands still gripping the towel as I tried to gather my thoughts. I glanced around the bathroom, my eyes darting from corner to corner, half expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows. But there was nothing, only the faint echo of my own breathing. My phone was sitting on the counter, and I quickly snatched it up, my fingers trembling as I dialed my best friend's number. It rang several times before she answered, her voice still groggy from sleep. "Hello?" "Hey, it's me. I need to tell you something," I said, my voice shaky. "Something weird is happening." "What's going on?" she asked, concern creeping into her tone. I just got out of the shower, and when I looked at the mirror, there was a message written on it. It says, "I know where you sleep." I could hear my own voice breaking as I said the words aloud. I don't know who would do this, but I'm scared. There was a long silence on the other end, and I could hear her shifting around, probably sitting up in bed. Okay, just stay calm," she said. "Did you check to see if there's anything else? Is the door locked? The windows?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I've checked everything. I don't know how someone could get in, but the message was there. I saw it. It didn't just disappear when the steam cleared. It's still on the mirror." "Okay, listen," she said, her voice now more urgent. "Don't stay there alone. Can you leave the apartment? Go somewhere else, maybe a friend's house." I hesitated, looking around the bathroom once more. "I don't know. I'm scared. I don't know who to trust anymore." "How did they know about that? How did they know where I sleep?" "You don't have to do this alone," she reassured me. "I'll be there soon, okay? Just hold tight. Don't go anywhere." I ended the call and dropped the phone onto the counter. The words on the mirror still stared back at me, a constant reminder of the feeling of being watched, of not being alone. I couldn't make sense of it. There was no way anyone could have gotten into my house without me hearing or noticing. I lived on the 3rd floor of an apartment building with locked entrances. No one should have been able to get in without me knowing. The silence in the apartment seemed to grow heavier as I stood there, staring at the message. I could feel my pulse racing, the panic rising again. What did it mean? Was someone just messing with me, trying to make me paranoid? Or was this something more? The unsettling thought lingered, what if they really did know where I slept? The idea of someone watching me, someone who knew my every move, was enough to make my skin crawl. I turned away from the mirror, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. I wrapped the towel around me tighter and left the bathroom, heading into the living room. I needed to get some space, clear my head. But the thought of that message, of the words that had appeared on the mirror, kept replaying in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was behind this knew more about me than I realized. Minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I jumped at the sound, my heart racing in my chest. I rushed to the door, hoping it was my friend, though a part of me dreaded finding out who else might be standing on the other side. I opened the door, and there she was, my best friend, standing in the hallway with a worried expression. She stepped inside quickly, scanning the apartment before her eyes landed on me. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but filled with concern. I don't know," I replied, my voice trembling. The message on the mirror, it just keeps running through my mind. I don't know who would do this. It feels too real, like someone's been in here. She walked over to the bathroom and took a deep breath before looking at the mirror. The words were still there, as clear as ever. Her face paled as she read them, her fingers brushing lightly against the glass, almost as if she were searching for something. "I don't like this," she said softly, "but we need to get you out of here. Let's go to my place, okay?" I nodded, still in shock, still unable to fully process what was happening. I don't know if I can stay here tonight. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe here again. "We'll figure this out," she said, her tone reassuring. "But you don't have to be here alone." We grabbed my things, and I locked up the apartment behind me. As we left the building, I glanced back toward my door, my eyes lingering on the hallway. The feeling of being watched still hung heavy in the air, and I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been waiting for me to leave. As we drove to her place, I couldn't stop thinking about that message. "I know where you sleep." The words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder that I was never truly alone. The night felt darker, more oppressive, and I wondered if I'd ever feel safe in my own space again. But for now, I was with my friend, and as long as I was with her, I didn't feel so alone. Story 9. And 9. I sat in front of my computer, watching the footage from my security cameras, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain the uneasy feeling that had settled in my stomach. The video feed was clear, the timestamp ticking steadily forward. It was from last night, starting around 11 p.m. Everything seemed normal at first. I was just finishing up my work, getting ready for bed, when something caught my eye. There, just outside my front door, stood a figure. At first they were just standing there, blending into the shadows, but as the camera adjusted I could see them more clearly. They weren't moving, just staring, their gaze fixed on the door. My heart began to pound as I leaned closer to the screen. The person didn't seem to move for what felt like hours. I watched the footage in disbelief, my mind trying to make sense of it. Who was that? Why were they just standing there? The figure didn't seem to have any purpose, just a motionless observer in the dark. My throat went dry, and I found myself holding my breath as I watched the minutes pass. They didn't seem to flinch, didn't turn away, didn't look anywhere else. Just stare. I checked the time again, 1:30 a.m. The person hadn't moved an inch. I felt a creeping anxiety crawl up my spine. Why would anyone stand outside my door for so long without doing anything? It wasn't just weird, it was disturbing. I wanted to skip ahead, but I forced myself to watch every minute. What if I missed something? What if there was a detail I wasn't seeing? As I scrolled forward, I couldn't help but feel a rising sense of dread. The figure stayed put, unmoving, for nearly 3 hours. At 3 a.m. something shifted. The person turned their head slightly, as though they had noticed the camera. I froze, my eyes wide, trying to interpret their expression. But there was no way to tell. Their face was hidden in shadow, their features obscured by the dim lighting. The camera continued to record, but the person never stepped away. They were still staring, like they were waiting for something. I felt like I was being watched, even though I knew I was the one looking at the footage. Every second felt heavier than the last. My mind raced with questions, but no answers came. I jumped when my phone buzzed, snapping me out of the trance-like state I'd fallen into. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize, reading, "I see you're watching." I dropped the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. How did they know? I quickly scrambled to grab it again, my fingers fumbling with the screen as I typed back frantically, "Who is this?" I hit send before I could second guess myself. Seconds ticked by, and I waited for a response, my eyes darting nervously between the camera feed and my phone. The silence was deafening. I watched the screen, watching the figure continue to stand there, unblinking, unyielding. Then, the response came, "I've been here all night. You haven't noticed." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My thoughts spun, and I felt like the walls were closing in. How had I not noticed? I had been home all night, safe in my own space. But the idea that someone had been outside watching me the whole time made the room feel smaller, suffocating. I rechecked the footage, and the figure was still there, motionless, like they were waiting for me to do something. I felt an overwhelming urge to do something, anything, to make this stop. But I couldn't. I was frozen, my thoughts racing 1,000 miles a minute. What did they want from me? Why didn't they leave? I felt the strange urge to call someone, anyone. But who could I call? I couldn't exactly explain this to anyone without sounding insane. I could call the police, but they would probably just tell me it was a prank, or that I was overreacting. But the message, "I see you're watching," it was too specific, too personal. I quickly checked the other cameras, the ones that monitored the back and sides of the house. There was no sign of anyone else. The back door was locked. The windows were secure. The only sign of intrusion was this person outside my front door, standing there for hours, watching, waiting. I had to do something. I had to get out of there. I couldn't stay locked in my own house, paralyzed by fear. I grabbed my keys and rushed to the door, my hands trembling as I opened it. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I couldn't stand being inside any longer. I had to see it for myself. I stepped outside, my eyes scanning the area, looking for any sign of the figure. But the street was empty, the night still and quiet, nothing but the distant hum of the city. There was no one in sight. I felt a cold chill settle over me as I glanced around, hoping, praying that they were just a figment of my imagination. But the message, the footage, it was real. It wasn't a trick. Someone had been there. I backed away from the door, my pulse quickening as the silence of the night pressed in around me. I glanced at the camera, almost expecting to see the figure there again, staring back at me. But there was nothing. The feed was just as it had been before, empty still. The strange figure was gone. I went back inside, locked the door behind me, and sank down onto the couch. My hands still shook, my mind still trying to make sense of what had happened. I didn't know if the person had left or if they were still out there, watching. But for the first time in a long while, I felt completely vulnerable. As I sat in the quiet darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that the person wasn't gone. They were still out there, waiting. And somehow, I knew it wasn't over. It was just the beginning. Story 10. The phone rang just after midnight. I had been drifting off to sleep, and the sudden sound of the ringtone startled me awake. My hand instinctively reached for the phone on the nightstand, my eyes squinting in the dim light as I saw an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. I hesitated for a moment. It was late, and I didn't recognize the number. Maybe it was a wrong dial or a telemarketer, I thought, but something inside me urged me to pick it up. I answered the call, bringing the phone to my ear, and all I could hear was a heavy, ragged breathing on the other end. It wasn't the sound of someone talking. It wasn't the noise of a call dropping. It was deep, labored breathing, like someone was standing right there, just waiting for me to speak. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and an unsettling chill washed over me. "Hello?" I said, my voice coming out softer than I intended. The breathing didn't stop. It grew heavier, more labored. It felt like someone was trying to catch their breath, and I could hear their struggle. But there was no reply, no words, just the sound of someone or something breathing. I waited for a moment, hoping the person on the other end would speak. Maybe it was a prank, a wrong number, or some strange glitch. But the breathing continued, filling the silence like an ominous presence. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, trying to make sense of what was happening, but all I could hear was that same unsettling sound. Then, without warning, the call ended. I was left holding the phone in the dark, my heart racing. I sat there stunned for several seconds, trying to process what had just happened. Who was that? What was that breathing? And why would someone call me at this hour without saying anything? I quickly checked the call log, but the number was already gone. There was no record of it. My thumb hovered over the screen, unsure of what to do next. I could try calling it back, but something told me it would only lead to more unanswered questions. I didn't want to hear that breathing again. I didn't want to open myself up to whatever that was. My mind started racing, each thought more paranoid than the last. Was someone watching me? And had I heard something in the background of the call that I had missed? I looked around the room, suddenly aware of the quiet, the stillness. The moonlight streaming through the window seemed colder than usual, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. I tried to shake it off. It was probably nothing, just a prank. But the more I thought about it, the more my unease grew. Why was the person on the other end of the line breathing like that? Why hadn't they said anything? And why had they called me in the first place? I spent the rest of the night lying in bed, wide awake. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside seemed louder than usual. I couldn't stop thinking about that call, about the sound of that breath, the way it seemed to linger in my mind long after the phone call had ended. The next day I checked my phone again, hoping to see something that would explain what had happened. But there was nothing, no voicemail, no missed call log, nothing to give me any clues. It was like the call had never happened at all, as though it had been erased from existence. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That call, it had felt too real, too deliberate, like someone had meant to make sure I heard it. I wondered if I had imagined it, but the clarity of the breathing, the weight of it told me otherwise. It wasn't a dream. A few days passed, and I tried to move on, dismissing the whole thing as a bizarre coincidence. But the anxiety still lingered. Every time my phone rang, my heart skipped a beat. I'd glance at the screen, half expecting to see that same unknown number again, to hear that same heavy breathing on the other end. But it never came. The call stopped, and the weight of that strange, silent encounter seemed to fade, replaced by a new normal. Or so I thought. About a week later, I received another call in the middle of the night. This time, the number was different, but I recognized the pattern. It was a blocked number. I froze for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I stared at the phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over the answer button. Was it happening again? I answered the call, my voice trembling as I said, "Hello?" There was silence at first, and then that same heavy breathing started, slow and deliberate, filling the air around me. My stomach churned as I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the screen in disbelief. This was the same thing, the same breathing. It was happening again. I didn't know what to do. Should I hang up? Should I call the police? Should I scream? My mind was racing as the breathing continued, a constant reminder that someone somewhere was listening. Someone had been waiting. I felt trapped, like I had no control over the situation. I quickly ended the call and tried to calm myself. My hands shook as I set the phone down, the sound of that breath still echoing in my mind. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just some random call. Whoever was on the other end knew exactly who I was, and they were trying to reach me. The next morning I filed a report with the authorities, but they couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. There were no signs of anyone trying to contact me, no record of the calls in the system. They told me to be cautious, to avoid answering calls from unknown numbers, but that didn't sit right with me. It didn't explain the strange breath that I had heard, the sensation that someone had been watching me, waiting for me to pick up the phone. I stopped answering calls from unknown numbers. I started screening my calls, and for a while, things seemed to calm down. But I couldn't forget the sound of that breathing. It haunted me every time the phone rang, every time I lay down to sleep. I had become hyper-aware of the slightest noise, the faintest sound of air moving, as though I could hear someone's breath just behind me. I checked my doors and windows more frequently, making sure they were locked tight, convinced that someone was still out there, just waiting. And then, months later, I got a text message. It came from an unknown number, and when I opened it, all it said was, "You didn't answer last time. I'll keep calling until you do." The heavy breathing wasn't gone, it had only been waiting. Story 11. I found my car parked at the end of my driveway, even though I had parked it in the garage. The sight of it sitting there, exposed and out of place, immediately triggered a sense of unease. My mind raced with questions. How did it get there? Had I forgotten to park it in the garage? I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just a simple mistake, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. I stepped outside, my feet cold against the concrete driveway as I made my way toward the car. The engine wasn't running and the keys were still in my pocket, but the more I looked at it, the more unsettled I became. I had parked it in the garage before going inside last night, there was no doubt about it. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the driver's side door and checked the interior. Everything seemed normal, nothing out of place. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger with every passing second. I walked back toward the house, glancing around the yard as I went. The silence around me was deafening, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was lurking just out of sight. I rushed inside, locking the door behind me, and checked the security cameras. As expected, the footage showed nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual footage of the night, with no signs of anyone moving my car. But the fact that the car was now sitting at the end of the driveway made no sense. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, maybe a prank or a simple mistake. But as I sat there, my thoughts began to spiral. What if someone had been inside my house last night? What if they had moved the car, and I hadn't noticed? The idea made my stomach twist with dread. I decided to call the police, hoping they could offer some explanation or at least provide a sense of safety. When the officer arrived, I explained everything to him: the car, the strange feeling, the security footage. He listened patiently, but when he asked if I had any suspects or if anyone had access to my garage, I couldn't think of anyone who could have done it. No one knew about my garage code, and I always made sure to keep it locked. The officer walked around the property, checking the locks on the garage and the doors. He found no signs of forced entry, nothing that would indicate someone had been in the house or tampered with the car. He suggested that it might have been a mix-up, that maybe I had accidentally left the garage door open and someone parked the car for me as a joke. I didn't buy it, but I nodded and thanked him anyway. As the officer left, I stood in the doorway, watching him drive away. I wanted to believe that it was just a simple mistake, but my gut told me something more sinister was at play. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had moved my car was still out there, watching me. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety. I locked every door and window, double-checking them before bed. I avoided going into the garage, afraid that someone might be hiding there, waiting for me to slip up. The thought of it sent a chill through me every time I thought about it. Then, one evening, as I was making dinner, I noticed something in the corner of my eye. A shadow. It was quick, just a flash at the edge of the window, but it was enough to send my heart racing. I moved closer to the window and peered outside, but there was nothing there. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but deep down I knew something was wrong. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard a faint tapping sound coming from the window. My heart skipped a beat, and I sat up, straining to hear. It came again, louder this time, a rhythmic tapping that seemed to echo through the silence of the house. I slowly got out of bed and moved toward the window, my hand trembling as I pulled back the curtain. There was no one there, just the empty yard, bathed in the pale light of the street lamp. But as I turned to walk away, I noticed something else, something that made my blood run cold. The door to the garage, which I had locked earlier that day, was slightly ajar. A crack, barely noticeable, but enough to make my stomach lurch. I froze, unable to move for a moment. Had I left it like that? I didn't think so. I was sure I had locked it. I stood there, staring at the door, the tapping sound still ringing in my ears. After a long moment, I gathered enough courage to walk toward it. My mind raced with possibilities. Was someone in the garage? Was someone inside my house? I didn't know, but I couldn't just leave it. I had to check. With each step, my anxiety grew. I approached the garage door, my heart pounding in my chest, and reached for the handle. I opened it slowly, cautiously, half expecting to find someone lurking in the dark. But when I flipped on the light, the garage was empty. Nothing was out of place. The car was parked where I had left it earlier, and everything seemed normal. I sighed with relief, but the feeling didn't last long. Something was still off. I locked the door again, but the sense of unease stayed with me. Who was behind this? Why were they messing with me? I didn't know, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The next morning, I checked the security footage again, looking for anything that might explain the strange events. As I scrubbed through the video, I saw something that made my heart stop. A figure, standing just outside the garage, right before I had gone to bed the previous night. They were watching the house, standing perfectly still in the shadows, waiting. The footage didn't show them moving, but I knew they had been there. The fear returned, stronger than ever. I called the police again, but this time, when they arrived, they didn't take the situation lightly. They searched the house thoroughly, checking every room, every closet, every corner. They checked the garage again, even taking fingerprints from the door handle. The officer who spoke to me looked concerned, but he didn't have any new answers. It seemed like whoever was behind this knew how to cover their tracks, how to stay hidden just out of sight. I decided to install more security cameras around the house, setting up motion sensors and extra lighting. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for someone to make the next move. I had to protect myself. As the weeks passed, the strange events continued. The car was moved again, once more parked at the end of the driveway. I found more messages, vague and cryptic, appearing on my phone. Each one seemed to bring me closer to the edge, pushing me to the brink of my sanity. But despite everything, I never stopped fighting. I kept my house locked up tight, my eyes always on the lookout for anything unusual. I knew that whoever was doing this wasn't going to stop until I gave up, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I was going to take back control. This was my home, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. And eventually the messages stopped. The car was left where I had parked it, and the strange occurrences grew less frequent. Whoever had been watching me, whoever had been tormenting me, disappeared as suddenly as they had arrived. It was as if they had never been there at all. But even now, sometimes, when I pull into my driveway, I can't help but glance over my shoulder, wondering if they're still out there, waiting. Story 12. I woke up with a strange feeling, as if something was off. The first thing I noticed was how bright the morning light poured through my window, casting warm rays across the room. As I slowly sat up in bed, my gaze drifted toward the spot where I usually left my sheets a bit tangled. But today, everything looked different. My bed was perfectly made, as if someone had come in during the night and tidied it up. The covers were neatly arranged, the pillows fluffed, and not a crease in sight. My heart started to race. I hadn't been in my room all night, not even to sleep. The last thing I remembered was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, and falling asleep on the couch. I hadn't heard anything out of the ordinary, no footsteps, no doors opening or closing. I sat there, frozen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How could my bed be made when I hadn't been in here at all? No one else lived with me, so it was impossible for someone to have done it while I was away. I stood up and walked over to the bed, my fingers brushing the soft fabric of the neatly arranged sheets. The smoothness of the bed felt almost unnatural, as if it had been freshly made, not just tidied up. I checked the corners of the blanket, feeling for any signs of disturbance, but everything was in perfect order. I glanced around the room, half expecting to find someone hiding in the corner, but it was empty. The room was eerily quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the outside world coming through the window. The more I thought about it, the more unsettling the situation became. Had I sleepwalked and made the bed in my sleep? It seemed unlikely. I'd never done anything like that before. And even if I had, how could I have done it without remembering? The thought of losing chunks of time like that sent a chill down my spine. I tried to push it out of my mind, but something about the neatness of the bed felt like a sign, as though it was trying to tell me something. I began to check the rest of the room. The dresser drawers were all closed, nothing seemed out of place, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I opened my closet and looked around. The clothes were exactly where I had left them, no sign of anything being moved. But the bed was what I kept coming back to. Why had it been made? I thought about calling someone, maybe a friend or family member, to talk it through, but I didn't want to sound crazy. How could I explain this to anyone without them thinking I was imagining things? I had to be missing something. Maybe there was some logical explanation, something I hadn't thought of yet. My mind kept racing through possibilities as I paced around the room. Could someone have come into my house during the night? The thought of a stranger in my home sent a wave of nausea through me, but I quickly dismissed it. All the doors were locked when I checked them earlier. There was no way anyone could have entered without leaving a trace. Still, I felt an unshakable unease creeping over me, like I was being watched. I went into the kitchen to grab some coffee, hoping to calm my nerves. As I poured the coffee into my mug, my mind kept returning to the bed, to the inexplicable neatness. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I couldn't focus, couldn't concentrate on anything. It was as if the entire room, the bed, was taunting me, daring me to figure it out. After some time, I returned to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. I ran my fingers over the fabric once again, feeling for any sign that it wasn't just made by me or by anyone else. But no matter how many times I checked, the bed remained as perfect as it had been when I woke up. It was like something was waiting for me to notice, like it was challenging me to find an explanation. I decided to check the security footage from the cameras I had installed around the house. I wasn't sure if it would reveal anything, but I figured it was worth a try. I grabbed my phone and accessed the footage. As I scrolled through the video, my heart skipped a beat when I saw nothing. The camera showed no one entering the room, no one making the bed. In fact, there was no sign of any movement in my room throughout the entire night. The footage confirmed that I had been the only one in the house. The only person who could have been in that room was me, but I was certain I hadn't been in there. I hadn't even set foot in the room, let alone made the bed. Yet here I was, staring at a bed that was perfectly made, as if someone had done it for me. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, unable to shake the strange feeling that something was wrong. I couldn't concentrate on anything: work, meals, or even talking to friends. My thoughts kept returning to that bed, to the quiet stillness of the room. I thought back to other moments when I'd felt like something was off, moments when I hadn't been able to explain things, but nothing had ever been as unsettling as this. That night I stayed in my room. I didn't want to sleep anywhere else. I couldn't shake the feeling that the bed was waiting for me. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, hoping for some kind of answer, some kind of clarity. But the longer I lay there, the more I realized I may never know the truth. Maybe I had made the bed in my sleep, or maybe there was something I didn't understand yet. Whatever it was, the answer seemed just out of reach, always just beyond my grasp. And as I drifted off to sleep that night, I realized that some questions are meant to remain unanswered. The bed was made, and perhaps that was all that mattered. Whatever had happened, it no longer seemed to matter. It was over, and life would continue. But deep down, I knew one thing for sure: some things are best left unexplained. Story 13. I woke up to the sound of a phone ringing. At first, I thought it was just a dream, but the persistent sound grew louder, pulling me from my sleep. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand, 3:17 a.m. My mind raced as I tried to gather my thoughts, wondering who would be calling me at this hour. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand, the coldness of the screen surprising me as I picked it up. It wasn't my phone ringing. It was the landline, the one I rarely used anymore. I reached for the receiver, my heart already pounding with anxiety. The ringing stopped just as I brought the phone to my ear. The silence that followed was deafening. I waited, but there was nothing. No one on the other end, no sound, just a heavy, unbroken quiet. I called out, "Hello?" but received no reply. I pulled the phone away from my ear and checked the display. Nothing. No missed call, no indication of who had dialed it. I placed the receiver back in its cradle, the strange ringing still echoing in my mind. Was it some kind of prank? Maybe it was a telemarketer or a wrong number. But it felt off. It felt too real, too deliberate. As I lay back down, I tried to shake the unsettling feeling, but I couldn't. My mind replayed the events over and over. How had the phone ring so perfectly, so precisely, as if someone knew I would pick it up? I tried to ignore it, hoping it was just my imagination running wild in the dark of the night. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house seemed louder than usual. Every shadow in the corner of my room felt heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something unseen. I couldn't tell if it was the phone call or just my own nerves, but my skin prickled with unease. I eventually managed to fall asleep, though it was restless, filled with fragmented dreams that left me more exhausted than when I had gone to bed. When the morning light broke through the curtains, I didn't immediately think about the phone call, but the moment I walked into the kitchen, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Sitting on the kitchen counter, right where I always left my keys, was the same landline receiver, the cord twisted and hanging loosely. It hadn't been there when I went to bed. I was sure of it. I hadn't left it out, and I certainly hadn't taken it off the hook. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had someone been in my house? Had they placed it there while I slept? But there was no sign of anyone, no disturbance, nothing out of place. I picked it up, my hand trembling as I did. It was still warm, as if someone had just used it. But there was no explanation. No note, no message, nothing to tell me why it had been placed there or who had done it. I checked my phone for any missed calls, any messages, any signs of what had happened. But there was nothing. Just a blank screen staring back at me. That afternoon, I decided to tell a friend about the strange incident. I thought that talking about it might help clear my mind, might make it seem less terrifying. I explained everything, from the phone ringing in the middle of the night to the receiver being placed on the counter. My friend listened, but I could tell they didn't take me seriously. It was probably just a glitch or some kind of mistake, they said, brushing it off. But I knew something wasn't right. That night I tried to stay awake, determined not to let the phone ring again without knowing who was behind it. I sat in my living room with the lights on, my phone in hand, and the landline on the table beside me. I waited, listening to every creak of the house, every small sound. But as the hours dragged on, nothing happened. The house remained still, silent. At around 2:45 a.m., my phone buzzed. I jumped, startled by the sudden noise. I quickly picked it up, checking the screen, but there was nothing. No text message, no notification, just an empty screen. Then, the landline rang again. My heart skipped a beat as I heard it, loud and clear in the otherwise silent house. I didn't hesitate this time. I picked up the receiver immediately, the line crackling faintly as I held it to my ear. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaking. But there was no response, no sound at all, just dead air. I waited for what felt like an eternity, but no one spoke. I could hear my own breathing in the quiet, the only sound in the room. The phone call lasted only a few seconds before the line went dead. I hung up the receiver, my hands shaking uncontrollably. What was happening? Why was this happening to me? I sat there, unable to move, too scared to get up and check the house. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. It was like someone was just outside the room, just beyond the walls, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. The next day, I decided I had enough. I wasn't going to stay in this house, in this place where I felt like I was being slowly driven mad. I called the phone company, asking if they could check the line for any issues, any signs of tampering. They assured me there was nothing unusual. The phone line was perfectly fine. They suggested that it might have just been a technical glitch, but I didn't believe it. That night, as I prepared to leave the house, I heard the phone ring again. It was faint at first, like a distant echo, but it grew louder as I walked through the hall. The same line, the same ringing. I froze. There was no way I could ignore it now. I picked up the receiver one last time. This time I wasn't going to wait for silence or dead air. I was ready for whatever came next. But instead of hearing the usual nothingness, I heard a voice. A soft, almost whispering voice, but clear enough to make out the words, "I'll be there soon." The voice was familiar, but I couldn't place it. It sent a shiver down my spine, and I dropped the receiver, unable to move for a moment. When I finally gathered the strength to look back at the phone, I saw it. The screen was flashing, showing a message I didn't send, a message I couldn't understand. It was a countdown, ticking away in seconds, moving towards 0. I left the house that night, abandoning everything behind. I didn't know who had called or why. but I wasn't going to stay to find out. As I drove away, I felt a sense of relief, but also a lingering fear. Whatever was happening, whatever was out there, it wasn't finished with me. It was just getting started. Story 14. I found a small box in my attic, but it wasn't something I'd ever seen before. It sat there, tucked away in the far corner behind some old suitcases and forgotten belongings, as if it had been deliberately hidden. The dust on its surface was thick, and the faded brown color made it blend in with the surrounding clutter. I reached for it cautiously, my fingers brushing against the worn cardboard. It was light, almost too light for its size, and when I picked it up, I couldn't shake the feeling that it didn't belong. The box had no markings, no label, nothing to indicate where it came from or who it belonged to. I turned it over in my hands, hoping for some clue, but there was nothing. It was unnervingly ordinary, yet it felt strangely out of place in the attic filled with family mementos and things I had long forgotten about. I hesitated for a moment before lifting the lid, wondering if I should even open it. Something about the box felt wrong, but my curiosity got the better of me. Inside there was nothing but a single piece of yellowed paper. It was folded neatly, as if someone had taken great care to keep it safe. My heart skipped a beat as I unfolded the paper, the creases cracking in the silence of the attic. The writing on it was unfamiliar, the ink faded and uneven, as if it had been written long ago. I scanned the words quickly, trying to make sense of them, but they were written in a language I didn't recognize. The letters looked strange, almost foreign, and they sent a shiver down my spine. I stared at the paper for a long time, trying to understand what it meant. There was a sense of urgency in the way the words were written, a warning buried somewhere in the cryptic lines. It didn't take long for me to feel like I had uncovered something I wasn't meant to find. I folded the paper back and placed it inside the box, my hands trembling slightly. I didn't know why, but I felt like I needed to leave it undisturbed, as if the box and its contents had been waiting for me to find them. I sat there for a moment, holding the box in my hands, unsure of what to do next. My mind raced with questions. What was the paper trying to tell me? Who had written it, and why had they hidden it in my attic? Was it a relic from the past, or something more sinister? The air in the attic felt thick, oppressive, as if the very space was holding its breath, waiting for me to make a decision. I decided to take the box downstairs and examine it more closely. The attic felt too suffocating, too isolated. I needed to be in the light, where I could think clearly. As I carried the box down the stairs, I noticed the peculiar weight of it, how it seemed to grow heavier with each step. When I reached the bottom, I set it down on the kitchen table and stared at it for a while longer. The faint smell of mildew clung to the box, but there was something else, too, a hint of something metallic, almost like rust, but not quite. The more I thought about the paper, the more uneasy I became. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling that had taken root in the pit of my stomach, telling myself it was just an old relic, something that had lost its meaning long ago. But that didn't explain why I felt so unsettled, why I couldn't shake the sense that this box was connected to something bigger, something hidden just beneath the surface. I carefully opened the box again, not sure what I was expecting to find. The paper was still inside, its edges slightly frayed from age. But there was something else now, another object, tucked underneath the folded sheet. It was small, round, and made of metal, its surface tarnished and worn. I picked it up and examined it closely. It looked like a coin, but the symbols etched into its surface were unlike anything I had ever seen before. The strange markings seemed to shift when I tilted it in the light, as if they were alive, moving with a purpose I couldn't understand. I set the coin down on the table and tried to make sense of the symbols, but they were indecipherable. I couldn't even tell which direction the markings were supposed to face. There was something deeply unsettling about the coin, its weight almost too much to bear in my hand. I couldn't explain it, but I felt drawn to it, as if it were beckoning me to uncover its secret. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the box and its contents. I laid in bed, the image of the coin and the strange writing burned into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I was missing, something important that I wasn't seeing. I tried to dismiss it, to convince myself that it was just an old artifact, but the feeling of dread lingered in the back of my mind. The next day, I decided to take the box and its contents to a local historian, hoping they could shed some light on what I had found. The historian was an older woman who had lived in the area her entire life, and she had an extensive knowledge of local history and folklore. When I showed her the paper and the coin, her expression changed. She didn't speak at first, just stared at the objects in silence, her eyes wide with shock. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her tone sharp with concern. I told her about the attic, about how the box had been hidden among old belongings. She nodded slowly, as if processing the information, but her face remained grim. "This is not something you should have found," she said quietly. "This coin, it's part of an old, forgotten ritual. A ritual that was never meant to be disturbed." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I had been right. The box wasn't just an old relic. It was a key, a piece of something much darker, something that had been buried for a reason. She explained that the symbols on the coin were part of a long-forgotten practice, one that had been banned centuries ago due to its dangerous nature. The coin was a marker, a way of signaling that someone was ready to take part in the ritual, whether they knew it or not. I didn't know what to say. I felt as if the ground beneath me was shifting, as if everything I thought I knew about my own home was being called into question. The historian told me that the ritual had been sealed away, hidden from the public eye, but that it had always been waiting for the right person to uncover it. And now, that person was me. I left her house in a daze, the weight of her words pressing down on me. The box, the paper, the coin, it wasn't just a strange discovery. It was a warning, a sign that something had been set in motion that couldn't be undone. I didn't know what the ritual entailed, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ready to find out. Story 15. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone absent-mindedly, trying to wind down after another long day. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that always felt heavier when I was alone. As I was about to put my phone down, a message notification popped up on the screen. I didn't recognize the number, it was just a string of digits, nothing familiar. Hesitating, I tapped the message open, the faint glow of the screen illuminating my face in the otherwise dark room. "I'm already here, just waiting." My breath caught in my throat. The words felt like a punch to my chest. My mind raced. Who was this? How did they know where I lived? My thumb hovered over the screen, uncertain whether to respond or ignore it. I checked the message again, the words still hanging in the air, taunting me. There was no other text, just those chilling few words. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see someone standing in the corner, but nothing. It was just the empty space of my living room, the flickering light from the TV reflecting off the walls. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My hand shook slightly as I placed the phone down on the coffee table. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was probably some prank or a wrong number. But something in my gut told me otherwise. I couldn't ignore the fact that I had been alone all day, hadn't seen anyone, hadn't heard anything. Yet here I was, sitting in my living room, reading a message from someone who claimed to be waiting. I stood up, walking over to the window and pulling the curtain aside just a little to peek outside. The streetlights illuminated the quiet suburban street, casting long shadows across the pavement. No cars, no figures standing in the yard. Everything looked normal, yet the unsettling feeling refused to leave. I stepped back from the window, moving slowly toward the door. I checked the locks twice before deciding to leave it as it was. No need to go overboard, I thought. It was probably nothing. But as I sat back down on the couch, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The room seemed colder now, the silence more oppressive. I stared at my phone, wondering if I should send a message back. Or should I ask who this was? Should I tell them to leave me alone? My finger hovered over the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to type anything. Something told me it wasn't safe. Suddenly my phone buzzed again, and my heart skipped a beat. The same number, the same cryptic message. Still waiting. This time a wave of panic surged through me. Who was doing this? I didn't recognize the number, didn't know anyone who would send me messages like this. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't have any evidence. It was just a number and a message, nothing concrete. What could I even tell them? Someone was waiting. It all felt absurd, but the dread in my chest was anything but. I felt the weight of something pressing down on me, something I couldn't see, but could feel in the air. I set my phone down, pacing around the room. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. The quiet outside had turned oppressive, the night feeling darker, the shadows longer. I tried to keep my mind focused, but my thoughts kept racing back to the message. It wasn't like any prank I'd ever received before. No one had ever been this persistent, this eerie. I walked over to the door again, checking the locks one more time, my fingers running over the cool metal of the deadbolt. Everything seemed in order. Still, I couldn't help but feel like something was wrong. I returned to the living room and sat down, trying to ignore the creeping sense of unease. I forced myself to focus on the TV, the flickering screen distracting me from the growing tension in the room. But it didn't help. I couldn't escape the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone was out there, waiting for something. Then, the silence was shattered by another buzz. The same number, the same chilling message. I'm in your yard. I froze, my blood running cold. How could they know? I hadn't heard anything. The yard was dark, empty when I had checked earlier. I bolted up from the couch, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed my phone again, my hands trembling, trying to steady my breath. I tried calling a friend, anyone, but no one answered. I was alone. I couldn't just sit here waiting while someone was out there, so close. I moved to the window again, my hands shaking as I parted the curtains just enough to peer outside. The street was still empty, no one in sight, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, hidden in the shadows, just out of view. I looked at the message again, the words searing into my brain. I'm in your yard. I closed the curtain quickly, feeling the panic rise in my chest. I needed to do something, but what? I wasn't prepared for this. I hadn't even thought about what I would do if something like this ever happened. My mind raced, coming up with 1,000 different scenarios, none of which made me feel safer. Then, a sound. It was faint at first, just a rustle, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. Something moving outside, something brushing against the window. I crept toward the window once more, trying to be as quiet as possible. My breath caught as I peered outside, but all I saw was the dark outline of the tree in the yard, swaying gently in the wind. No sign of anyone. But I didn't feel any better. The feeling of being watched was still there, gnawing at me. I quickly moved away from the window and grabbed my phone, trying to think clearly. I needed to get help. I dialed 911, my voice trembling as I explained the situation. The operator was calm, asking questions, but all I could focus on was the sound of something outside. The footsteps, the quiet rustle, growing closer. The operator assured me that officers would be on their way, but all I could hear was the rising panic in my chest. I didn't wait to find out what happened next. I grabbed my keys, bolting for the door, locking it behind me, and running out into the night. I didn't look back as I ran down the street, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly escaped something terrible. The officers arrived shortly after, but they found nothing. No one in the yard, no signs of anyone being there. The yard was empty as it had been when I first looked. But I knew what I felt, knew what I had heard, and I knew the messages weren't just a prank. That night, I didn't go back inside. I stayed at a friend's house, too shaken to be alone. And as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the unknown. Whoever had sent those messages, whoever had been waiting, was still out there, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over yet. Story 16. The soft glow of the hallway light flickered as I stepped out of my bedroom, feeling a tight knot form in my stomach. The silence of the house was oppressive, and the air felt thick, as if something was wrong, though I couldn't place what. I had just woken up, a sense of unease weighing on me, and when I glanced toward the door, I noticed it immediately. The door to the outside was cracked open. It wasn't wide, but it was enough for me to see that it was no longer secured. I knew I had locked it before I went to bed. The sound of my heartbeat echoed in my ears as I walked cautiously toward it, my mind racing through possibilities. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling slightly, unsure of what I would find on the other side. The house was quiet, unnaturally so, as if time itself had slowed down to watch me. I had always been careful with security, locking every door and window before bed, but now, standing there, I couldn't remember the last time I had checked the locks. My mind flashed back to moments from the previous evening, but nothing seemed out of place. Still, the door being ajar didn't sit right with me. I pushed the door open slowly, keeping my back pressed against the wall, expecting something or someone to be on the other side. Outside, the night air was cool, the wind barely rustling the leaves on the trees. The yard looked normal, no signs of disturbance, but the feeling of being watched clung to me like a shadow. I glanced around, my eyes scanning the darkness, but there was no sign of anyone. I stepped back inside, closing the door behind me and locking it once again. The sound of the bolt sliding into place was a small comfort, but it did nothing to ease the anxiety twisting in my chest. I checked the other windows in the house, double-checking every lock, but everything seemed secure. Still, something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone had been there, and that they were still watching. My phone buzzed on the table, interrupting my thoughts, and I grabbed it quickly, hoping for some distraction. The screen lit up with a new notification, a message from an unknown number. My stomach dropped as I opened it, reading the short, chilling text, "I know you're awake." I felt my heart skip a beat as I stared at the words, my mind reeling with questions. Who could have sent this? How did they know? My hands shook as I typed a response, trying to remain calm, but my fingers faltered on the screen. I hesitated, unsure of what to say, but before I could type anything, Another message appeared. It's too late now. You should have left when you had the chance. I stared at the message, the words twisting in my mind. They made no sense, but they felt wrong, like someone was toying with me. I scrolled through my messages, hoping to find something to explain this, but the conversation history was empty. My chest tightened as I looked around, but the house was still silent. I felt trapped, not just in my home, but in this growing sense of dread that had settled over me. I hadn't heard anything else since the tapping on the window, but now, with the door open and the cryptic messages, it felt as though something or someone was getting closer. My thoughts raced as I debated what to do next. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my door was open when it shouldn't have been. That I had received threatening messages from an unknown number. It didn't feel like enough to warrant a real investigation. Still, the fear gnawed at me, and I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I paced around the house, checking each room one by one, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up with every creak of the floorboards. The house felt different now, unfamiliar, as though it no longer belonged to me. I reached for the landline phone, intending to call for help, but before I could dial, I heard a sound. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, coming from the direction of the back door. The distinct sound of footsteps, soft and slow, like someone was carefully making their way through the house. I froze in place, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps stopped just outside the door, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread take over me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply waited, praying that whoever it was would leave. The seconds stretched on like minutes as I listened, my heart pounding so loudly in my ears that it was hard to hear anything else. But then, without warning, the door handle rattled. It was faint but unmistakable. Someone was trying to open it. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. The intruder was here, and they were no longer trying to hide. They were bold, making no effort to be discreet. I glanced toward the front door, but I knew it wouldn't be much safer. I needed to find a way out of here, but the house seemed like a trap. Every exit felt compromised. I grabbed my phone again, desperately trying to find something, anything, to help me. I searched the web for anything I could do in this situation, but my mind was so clouded with fear that it was hard to focus. My hands shook as I typed a search for emergency help, but I stopped when I heard the sound of glass breaking. It was sharp, sudden, and unmistakable. The back door had been broken into. I jumped to my feet, heart racing, and sprinted toward the front door, my mind barely processing the panic that had taken hold of me. The moment I reached for the handle, I heard the sound of footsteps again, closer now, coming from the hallway behind me. I turned just in time to see a shadow move across the wall, blocking the light from the hallway. The figure was tall and thin, moving with an unnatural grace. My throat tightened as I tried to back away, but my feet felt frozen to the floor. The figure didn't say anything. They didn't need to. The look in their eyes told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a random intrusion. This was personal. The fear that surged through me was overwhelming, but I couldn't let it paralyze me. I needed to act. I dashed for the back door, not thinking about anything except escaping. My mind was clouded with panic, but I knew I had to make it to the street, to somewhere I could get help. As I reached the door, I heard the sound of footsteps close behind me, the heavy thud of their approach echoing through the hall. I grabbed the doorknob and twisted, but it wouldn't budge. The door was locked. I turned just in time to see the figure reach out toward me, their hand just inches from my arm. I let out a scream, one of pure terror, as I struggled with the door, willing it to open. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the pressure lifted. The figure stopped moving, their hand falling to their side. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled back, my mind trying to make sense of what was happening. The figure stepped back, their face still obscured by the shadows. And then without a word, they turned and walked toward the hallway, disappearing into the darkness of the house. The fear that had gripped me so tightly began to ebb away, replaced by confusion and disbelief. Had it all been some twisted dream? Had I imagined it? I hesitated, standing in the doorway, my hand still on the knob. I had no idea who they were or why they had come. But one thing was certain, I was no longer alone. Story 17. I was standing in the kitchen when I heard the sound of a light thud at the door. It was early in the afternoon, and I hadn't been expecting any deliveries. I wasn't sure what it was at first, but when I opened the door, I found a small, brown box sitting on the porch. There was no return address, just my name scrawled across the front in bold, uneven handwriting. It looked like it had been dropped off hastily. I bent down to pick it up, feeling an odd sensation as I did. The box was surprisingly light, almost too light for its size. I glanced around the porch, hoping to see the delivery person, but there was no one in sight. I was alone in the house, and I couldn't remember ordering anything recently. The mystery of the package gnawed at me, but my curiosity won out. I brought it inside and set it down on the kitchen counter. I stared at the package for a moment, the strange feeling creeping up my spine. My name was the only thing on it, but there were no details about who sent it. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the tape that sealed the box. Something about the situation felt wrong, but I couldn't quite place why. Maybe I was overthinking it, I told myself. Maybe it was just a mistake, some mix-up in the delivery system. But still, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep in my chest. I grabbed a knife from the drawer and carefully cut through the tape, peeling back the flaps of the cardboard box. Inside, there was a single object wrapped in plain brown paper. My heartbeat quickened as I unwrapped it, revealing a small, old-fashioned clock. It looked like something you might find at a thrift store, with brass edges and a delicate face. The ticking of the clock was the only sound in the room as I held it in my hands, staring at it in disbelief. I turned it over, hoping to find some sort of clue, but there was nothing. No note, no message, just a simple clock. I inspected it carefully, trying to make sense of the situation. There was no reason I could think of why someone would send me a clock, especially one that looked so out of place in my home. I set the clock on the counter and walked around the kitchen, trying to clear my mind. I glanced at the clock again, noticing for the first time that the hands were frozen at exactly 3:15. It was an odd time to be stopped, but nothing about this situation seemed normal, so why would I expect anything to make sense? Just then I heard a faint knock on the door. I jumped, startled by the sudden sound. My heart skipped a beat as I made my way to the door, half expecting the delivery person to be there, or maybe someone who could explain the package. But when I opened it, there was no one. No delivery truck, no stranger standing on the porch, just the empty street and the quiet of the neighborhood. I closed the door slowly, a strange feeling of being watched creeping over me. I turned back to the kitchen, and that's when I noticed something strange. The clock was ticking. I could hear it faintly at first, and then more clearly as I stepped closer. The second hand had started moving, and the time had shifted from 3:15 to 3:16. I stared at it in disbelief. There was no way. I had checked it just moments ago. The hands had been frozen. This clock wasn't working before, so how was it ticking now? My head spun as I tried to rationalize what was happening. Maybe the jolt of opening the box somehow got the mechanism working again. Or maybe I was imagining things. But deep down I knew that wasn't the case. I grabbed my phone to check the time. It was 3:16. I felt a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. The clock was showing the exact same time, and that unnerved me even more. I glanced at the clock again, watching the second hand tick steadily around the face. The ticking had become louder, more insistent, almost like it was trying to get my attention. I turned it over once again, hoping to find something I had missed. That's when I noticed something new, a faint engraving on the back of the clock, just beneath the base. It was barely visible, but when I squinted I could make out the words, "Don't forget." My heart skipped in my chest. What did that mean? What was this message trying to tell me? I backed away from the clock, feeling a wave of panic wash over me. The room suddenly felt too small, too confining. I needed answers, but I had no idea where to start. I picked up the clock, carefully turning it over and over in my hands, searching for something that could explain the meaning behind it. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just some weird coincidence, something that could be easily explained away. But the feeling of dread was overwhelming. Who would send me this strange clock? And why now, after all this time? I couldn't get the engraving out of my head. Don't forget. What was I supposed to remember? What had I forgotten? I searched my mind, replaying every recent memory, every event that might connect to this mysterious package, but nothing came to the surface. As the clock continued ticking, I felt a sudden rush of anxiety. I needed to do something, anything to make sense of this. But the more I thought about it, the more questions I had. Why hadn't anyone else heard the knock? Why was the clock now working, even though it hadn't been when I first opened the box? And most unsettling of all, why had I received it? The day dragged on, and I found myself staring at the clock more and more. It ticked relentlessly, the sound echoing in the quiet of my house. I couldn't stop thinking about the engraving. It seemed so simple, yet it carried a weight that I couldn't ignore. The longer I thought about it, the more convinced I became that the clock was trying to tell me something. Maybe it was just an odd coincidence, I tried to tell myself, but deep down I knew something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this was, this strange package, this eerie clock, and the cryptic message was only the beginning of something far more unsettling. That night, I locked all the doors and made sure every window was secured. I set the clock on the counter, but I didn't want to look at it anymore. The ticking sound still echoed in my ears, no matter how far I went. And even though I tried to sleep, I couldn't help but feel that someone was waiting. Story 18. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when a notification popped up. It was from a social media account I didn't recognize, a name I had never seen before. My heart skipped a beat as I tapped on the notification. The photo loaded, and I was staring at an image of my own backyard. The angle was perfect, the lighting just right, like someone had taken it only moments ago. I froze, staring at the image. I hadn't seen anyone outside when I went into the living room earlier, and there were no signs of movement in the yard when I checked through the window. My backyard was fenced in, and it was the middle of the afternoon, so it wasn't like there could be someone lingering there without being noticed. But here it was, a clear, almost professional-looking photograph of my backyard. No one had been there, or at least no one I knew. My fingers shook as I scrolled down the page. The account had no profile picture, no bio, and only a few posts. All photos of my house and property from different angles, each one eerily recent. Some of the photos were taken at odd times of the day, showing the sun at different positions in the sky. But it was the last photo that sent a chill down my spine. It was a close-up shot of the back door to my house, the one I always lock at night. The door was slightly ajar. I jumped up, heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing with questions. How could anyone have gotten that close? I was sure I had locked it this morning. I even checked the deadbolt twice before leaving for work. My thoughts spiraled. Could it be someone I knew? Someone with a grudge? The fact that they knew my backyard, that they knew my routine, felt far too personal, too invasive. I immediately went to the back door, my legs feeling like lead with every step. I checked the lock, the bolt, it was secure. But something didn't feel right. The door frame, which usually felt solid, felt slightly off now, as though it had been tampered with, but there was no visible sign of forced entry. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that someone had been here, that they had been watching me. My breath caught in my throat as I glanced around the yard again, but there was nothing but the usual calm quiet. I rushed back to the living room, my mind racing as I sat down on the couch and tapped through the rest of the account's posts. My stomach twisted in knots as I found more images, some of my car parked in the driveway, others of me leaving for work, captured at moments I didn't remember. How long had they been watching me? How had they gotten these photos? The next post was a simple text written in bold font across a black screen. I'm always watching. I stared at it, the words echoing in my mind. I had no idea what to do. The idea that someone had been so close, so present in my life without me even knowing, made my skin crawl. I tried to think of anyone who could be behind this, anyone who might have access to my property or my social media accounts, but no one came to mind. My first instinct was to call the police, but I hesitated. What could I say? How could I explain that someone was sending me photos of my house without any concrete proof that they had actually done anything wrong? They hadn't broken in, at least not that I could see, but the thought of someone having access to my private space without my permission felt like a violation. My stomach churned with a mix of fear and anger. I paced the living room, the phone still in my hand, trying to think clearly. The account had no other posts after that last one, and there was no way to contact whoever was behind it. I didn't recognize any of the usernames that had commented on the photos, either. They seemed to be fake accounts, just as mysterious as the one that had sent the notification. No one had left any direct messages either, just the photos, each one more unsettling than the last. I glanced out the window, my heart thudding in my chest as I looked toward my backyard again. Everything seemed normal, calm, almost peaceful, but it didn't feel that way. It felt like something was wrong. I felt like I was being hunted, and the worst part was I couldn't tell who the hunter was or where they were hiding. I hadn't felt this unsafe in my own home before, and it was a terrifying feeling. I sat back down, my head in my hands, trying to control my breathing. I had to figure out who was behind this. I had to find a way to make it stop. My eyes wandered back to the phone screen, and just as I was about to delete the account, something new popped up, another notification. This time it was a video. I didn't want to open it, but my curiosity got the best of me. My finger hovered over the play button as my pulse quickened. I pressed it. The video started with a shaky camera angle, showing the outside of my house, the view from the street. It zoomed in slowly, creeping up toward the window where I sat just moments ago. I froze. The camera stayed focused on the window for a few seconds before it moved, panning down toward the ground. And then it stopped, capturing the shadow of a figure standing just outside my window. My heart leaped into my throat as I bolted up from the couch, turning toward the window. There was nothing outside, just the quiet suburban street. But the video, the figure, it was real, and it was standing there, watching me. I didn't know who it was, but I knew one thing for certain: they were very close. My mind raced as I frantically typed a message to the police, detailing everything I had seen and heard. I knew it was important to act fast before whoever was behind this decided to escalate things further. As I hit send, I could barely hold back the tears that had started to well up. I had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. This person, whoever they were, had been watching me for days, maybe longer, and now I was no longer sure if my home was safe. The walls of the house that once offered me comfort now felt like a cage. I didn't know who to trust, or if I could trust anyone at all. For the rest of the day, I stayed at a friend's place, too afraid to return home. My phone buzzed with notifications from the mysterious account, but I ignored them. I couldn't bring myself to look. All I wanted was for this nightmare to end. The next morning, the police showed up at my house. I led them to the backyard, showing them the photos and videos I had saved. They took everything into evidence, assuring me they'd investigate. But I could see the look in their eyes, a look that said they didn't know where to start. This wasn't a break-in. There were no fingerprints, no physical evidence, just the lingering sense of being watched. Days passed, and the strange account stopped posting. The messages, the photos, the files, they all stopped coming. But the fear didn't go away. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching, still out there, just waiting for the right moment to make their move. I moved out of my house a few weeks later. The police never found out who was behind it, and I couldn't stay in a place that no longer felt like home. The silence after everything stopped felt even more suffocating. I moved on, but the feeling of being watched never really left. Story 19. I had just stepped into my living room, the weight of the day still lingering in my bones. The quiet was comforting, almost too quiet. I had been looking forward to a peaceful evening, with no interruptions, no noise, just the solitude I craved. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the room, and everything was just as I had left it. It felt normal, but something in the air was off. Suddenly I heard it. A soft whisper, so faint I could barely distinguish the words. It came from inside the house. My heart stopped for a moment. My name, I thought, my pulse quickening. The voice was unmistakable, as if someone had whispered it right in my ear. But I was alone. There was no one else in the house. I stood frozen for a few seconds, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it was the wind, a trick of the house settling, a sound I misheard. But the more I thought about it, the more my blood ran cold. I knew what I heard. It wasn't my imagination. It was clear, distinct, as if someone had spoken my name in a soft, almost urgent tone. My throat went dry. I turned slowly, scanning the room. The air felt heavier now, as though something had shifted. The furniture, the walls, the silence, it all seemed too still, too expectant, as if waiting for something to happen. I had no idea what to do. The house felt familiar, but in that moment it was no longer my safe place. The whisper had shattered the peace. Taking a deep breath, I tried to calm myself. I told myself that it was just a coincidence, but the voice was so clear, so real. It didn't make sense. I stepped further into the room, my eyes darting to every corner, every shadow. No one was there. Everything was as it should be. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I walked through the house, checking every room, opening every door. The bathroom, the bedrooms, the kitchen, all empty, all still. I was alone. I had to be. Yet, the whisper had come from inside the house, unmistakably. It felt personal, like it was meant for me. I went back to the living room, sitting down on the couch, trying to make sense of it. My mind raced, desperately searching for any logical explanation. Could it have been the pipes? The creak of old wood? Maybe it was an echo from outside, carried in by the wind. But nothing seemed to fit. Nothing explained the voice that had called my name. Then, as I sat there, trying to breathe through the rising panic, I heard it again. This time it was louder, more distinct. "Come here." The whisper sliced through the silence like a knife. My eyes shot wide open, and I stood up, instinctively backing away from the sound. It wasn't coming from one direction. It seemed to echo, reverberate around the room, as though it was coming from everywhere at once. I was trembling now. I had to leave to get out of the house. But I didn't want to look like a fool, running away from nothing. I forced myself to walk toward the sound, my footsteps faltering as I crossed the threshold of the hallway. The air grew colder the further I went. It was as if the house itself was drawing me in, pulling me toward the sound of that voice. I reached the stairs and stopped. The whisper came again, this time even closer. "Come closer." It felt like the voice was right behind me, just out of sight. I turned quickly, my breath shallow, but there was no one there. The house remained empty, silent, save for the rush of my heartbeat in my ears. I looked up the stairs. The hallway above was dark, stretching out in front of me like a tunnel into the unknown. I felt an overwhelming urge to climb, to follow the voice, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. Against my better judgment, I began to ascend the stairs. With each step, the air seemed to grow colder, thicker. The whispering continued, urging me onward, coaxing me with its soft, irresistible command. I reached the top of the stairs, and the house felt even more oppressive. The silence was suffocating. At the end of the hallway stood the guest room, the only door still slightly ajar. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. In here, it was not a request. It was a demand pulling me toward the door. I couldn't stop myself. My feet moved on their own, each step feeling like I was sinking deeper into a fog I couldn't escape. I pushed the door open. The room was dark, nothing but shadows filling the space. But then I saw it. A figure standing in the corner of the room, facing the wall. I gasped, stumbling backward. It was a person, but not quite. They were like a shadow, almost blending into the darkness, their form too indistinct to make out. The whispers stopped suddenly, and for a moment there was only the deafening silence. I was frozen, my body paralyzed by fear. My heart hammered in my chest, and I could feel my breath catching in my throat. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to obey. Then, the figure slowly turned. I couldn't make out their face, but I could feel their gaze, cold and calculating, settling on me. My blood ran cold. The room felt impossibly small, as if the walls were closing in. Before I could move, the figure took a step toward me, and with it, the air around me seemed to grow even heavier. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. I turned, running down the hallway, desperate to get away. But the stairs seemed farther away than they had before. The house had shifted, and I could feel it, as if it were alive, bending and stretching to trap me inside. I reached the stairs, but before I could descend, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Cold, clammy fingers dug into my skin, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't dare look back. I had no choice but to turn and face whatever had followed me. But when I did, there was nothing there. The house was empty again. The silence returned, thick and suffocating. The whispering had stopped. I stood at the top of the stairs, my legs shaking, unable to move. After what felt like an eternity, I turned around, slowly making my way back to the living room. Everything looked the same as before. The shadows, the stillness, the weight of the air. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That something was still watching, still waiting. I sank onto the couch, exhausted, my heart still racing. I had to leave. I had to get out of the house before it pulled me in further. I grabbed my phone, dialing the number without thinking. I needed someone to hear me, to know what was happening. But just as the phone rang, I heard it again. The whisper, clear and sharp, "Not yet." Story 20. I had just returned from running a few errands, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the sidewalk as I walked up to my front door. My mailbox was a few steps away, and I always checked it when I got home, even if I didn't expect anything. I opened the flap, pulling out a few bills, junk mail, and then a small folded note. It was plain white with no envelope, no name, no return address, just a simple piece of paper. As I unfolded it, I felt a strange chill creep over me. The note was short. It simply said, "I know your secret." My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. My mind raced, flipping through every memory, every mistake, every moment where I might have said or done something that could have led to this. What secret? I didn't have any secrets that anyone else should know about, at least none that I could think of. The note wasn't signed. There was no indication of who sent it or how they could possibly know something about me that I hadn't shared. I stood there for a moment, frozen. The afternoon air suddenly felt colder, and my surroundings seemed to grow distant. The world felt a little less familiar, like I was being watched, like there was someone else, someone who knew something about me that I didn't want them to. I turned the note over, looking for any clue that might explain this strange message, but there was nothing. Just a blank back, empty except for the slight creases where the paper had been folded. I quickly shoved it into my pocket and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. My thoughts were spinning. How could someone know? Had I left something out in the open? Did I speak about something I shouldn't have? The paranoia started creeping in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was probably just a prank. But the nagging thought stayed with me. Someone out there knew something, and I had no idea who they were, how they had found out. I spent the rest of the evening pacing around my house, trying to distract myself. I went through my routines as usual, but nothing felt normal. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustling of the wind outside made me jump. I felt like I was living under a cloud of suspicion. Who could know my secret, and what was it? The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of dread. I glanced at my phone first thing, hoping to find something that would explain the note. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing. I tried to go about my day as usual, but the words from the note kept repeating in my mind. "I know your secret." It was like a voice echoing in the back of my head, reminding me of something I wasn't sure I wanted to remember. A week passed, and I tried to put the incident out of my mind, but the unease lingered. The note hadn't been mentioned again, and there were no other strange messages or signs. Life went on, and I tried to focus on the normal things: work, errands, household tasks. But every time I checked my mailbox, every time I stepped outside, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of anxiety. What if the person was watching me? What if they were going to reveal whatever secret they thought they knew? One afternoon, I came home from work to find another note in my mailbox. It was similar to the first one, but this time it was more specific. "I know what you did last summer," it said. The phrase made my stomach drop. Last summer. What could that mean? My mind raced again, desperately trying to recall anything I had done last summer that could possibly be relevant. But I couldn't think of anything unusual. I hadn't done anything out of the ordinary, at least nothing that anyone would need to know about. Yet there was a reminder that someone seemed to know something about my life. I quickly stuffed the note in my pocket and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I was becoming consumed by the idea that someone was out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. It felt like they were getting closer, like they knew more than I was willing to admit. The next few days were a blur of unease. I began to second-guess every decision, every interaction I had with anyone. Was someone at work trying to send a message? Was it someone from my past? Someone who had always been there, quietly waiting for me to slip up? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being stalked by an unseen force. Then, one evening, when I returned home from an errand, I found a third note in the mailbox. My hands shook as I pulled it out and read it. "I know everything," it said, "and I'm coming for you." My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just a prank anymore. This was something more. Whoever was behind this, they were not going to stop until they had whatever it was they wanted from me. The tone of the note felt darker, more sinister than the others. My breathing quickened as I stood frozen in place. I felt a cold sweat wet forming on my skin, a sense of dread building in the pit of my stomach. I looked around, but no one was there. The street was as quiet as ever. I felt as though the world around me had become eerily still, like the calm before a storm. I rushed inside, locked the door, and began to check every window, every corner of my house, as though the person who wrote the note was already inside, hiding in the shadows. But there was nothing. Everything seemed normal, too normal, like it always had been. The next few days were a blur of fear and paranoia. I couldn't sleep, couldn't concentrate. I kept waiting for anything to happen, but nothing did. No more notes. No more strange messages. No sign of whoever had been sending them. It was as if they had disappeared, vanished into thin air. I couldn't understand it. Why had they stopped? Were they still out there, watching me? Or had they decided I wasn't worth the trouble after all? Eventually, the fear started to fade, but I could never shake the feeling that someone knew something about me, something that I hadn't been ready to face. I began to question every secret I had kept, every decision I had made. But the one thing I knew for sure was that I would never be the same. The notes had changed something inside me. They had planted a seed of doubt, and no matter how much time passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone somewhere was still watching. The fear never truly left. It had become a part of me, and every time I passed my mailbox, every time I opened the door, I couldn't help but wonder if there would be another note waiting for me, with more chilling words. Would it ever end? Or would the person who knew my secret continue to watch, to wait, to remind me that no secret remains hidden forever? Story 21. I received a strange phone call that was just the sound of breathing, but the number was unfamiliar. The static on the line was thick, making it hard to hear anything else. But the steady, slow breaths came through clearly. I held the phone tightly, trying to make sense of it, but nothing seemed right. It wasn't just the breath. It was the eerily calm rhythm of it, like someone was sitting there, listening to me, waiting for me to say something. I looked at the screen, but the number was unfamiliar. It wasn't anything I recognized, not a friend, not a family member. I considered hanging up, but something kept me from doing it. I wondered if it was a wrong number, or maybe someone playing a prank. I stayed silent, waiting for the person on the other end to speak, but they didn't. They just kept breathing. The sound made my skin crawl, and I could feel the weight of the silence pressing on me. I hung up, but the moment I set the phone down, it rang again. The same number, the same breath. My heart started pounding in my chest. Who was this? Why were they calling me? The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, as I stared at the screen. I didn't want to answer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to, that I was being drawn into something I didn't understand. I picked up the phone again, my voice barely a whisper. Hello? The breathing continued, soft and slow, almost rhythmic. It was like they were testing me, waiting for me to break. I held my breath, trying to stay calm, but the longer the silence went on, the more I could feel my anxiety growing. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it someone I knew, someone trying to mess with me, or was it something else entirely? Finally, I slammed the phone down. I needed to clear my head. I couldn't stay in the same room, so I went outside, hoping the cool air would help calm me. As I walked to the front yard, my phone rang again. I didn't want to pick it up, but something compelled me to check the screen. The same number. My stomach dropped. It felt like I was being hunted, trapped in a game where I had no control. I turned my phone off, hoping that would end it. The last thing I wanted was to feel like I was being followed, tracked by someone who knew more about me than I did. I told myself it was nothing, just a random call, a mistake. But deep down I knew it wasn't. The breathing, the silence, it was deliberate. They wanted to know I was listening. I spent the rest of the evening on edge, pacing around my house, locking doors, double-checking windows. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was calling wasn't going to stop until I acknowledged them. But what did they want from me? Why was I the target? The phone calls continued, always the same, just the sound of slow breathing, unbroken and relentless. Sometimes I would pick up, hoping for something different, but each time it was the same. No words, just that breath. Eventually, I called the phone company, asking if there was anything they could do. They told me there wasn't much they could track without more details, but that it was probably just a prank. I didn't buy it. This didn't feel like a prank, it felt personal. I wasn't the only one who thought so either. I reached out to a friend, someone who had been through something similar, and they suggested I check the caller's number through reverse lookup. I did, but there was no record of the number anywhere. The anonymity made my skin crawl even more. Whoever was behind this didn't want to be found. I was left with nothing but a number that meant nothing, a voice that said everything. Days passed, but the calls kept coming, sometimes multiple times a day. I didn't want to let it control me, but it was hard not to. I couldn't sleep without checking my phone every few minutes. I couldn't go outside without feeling like someone was watching me. And each time the phone rang, I found myself hoping it was someone I knew, that it was just a mistake, but I always knew it wouldn't be. Then, one evening, something changed. The breathing stopped. I picked up the phone as usual, but this time there was no sound. I listened, hoping that maybe they would speak, but the line remained silent. My hands shook as I held the phone to my ear, waiting, but nothing came. A strange sense of relief washed over me. Maybe they had moved on, or maybe it was finally over. But then, after a moment of silence, a voice came through the line. It was a whisper, barely audible. "I'm watching." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I dropped the phone and stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. That was it. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just some prank. Whoever had been calling was still out there, and they weren't done with me. I turned to lock the door, but the sound of breathing filled the room again. This time, though, it wasn't coming from the phone. It was coming from behind me. I froze, every muscle in my body tense with fear. The footsteps that followed were soft, deliberate, and inescapable. I turned slowly, the breath catching in my throat. The house was empty, just like it had been before. But I wasn't alone anymore. I could feel it, the presence, the eyes, the weight of being watched. I backed away from the doorway, trying to get to the phone, but it wasn't just the calls that were coming for me anymore. The silence in the room deepened, and the fear crept into every corner of my mind. The breathing had stopped, but the feeling of someone else being there hadn't. The walls of my house felt smaller, the air thicker, suffocating. The weight of it pressed down on me, knowing that whoever was behind it all had been closer than I realized. Story 22. I woke up with a strange feeling, an unsettling heaviness hanging in the air. The soft light of the morning filtered through my curtains, but something felt off. As I turned over in bed, my eyes landed on the front door across the room. It was wide open, the cool breeze from outside gently blowing the curtains in, making them dance in the wind. My heart skipped a beat. I was certain I had locked the door before going to bed, and yet here it was, standing ajar. No sign of anyone nearby, not even a sound. I sat up quickly, my mind racing. I had lived in this house for years, and I'd never experienced anything like this. The door wasn't just slightly open, it was wide, as though someone had stepped in and left without a trace. My pulse quickened as I stood, cautiously walking toward the open door. I half expected someone to be standing on the other side, but there was nothing. The porch outside was empty, just the normal quiet of the neighborhood greeting me. I reached for the door, checking the handle. It was cold to the touch, as if it had been open for a while, but I couldn't recall hearing anything in the night. No footsteps, no creaking of the door. Just silence. I looked around the room once again, feeling the weight of the empty space around me. How had it been left open? I didn't know what to make of it. With a deep breath, I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was crisp, and there was an eerie stillness in the atmosphere. I looked around, scanning the area for any signs of movement, any hint that someone might have been here. The street was quiet, the only sound being the distant hum of traffic. No footprints in the dirt, no broken glass, nothing that would suggest someone had entered or exited my home. I walked to the edge of the porch and peered down the driveway, but still, there was no one. I felt a knot form in my stomach, and my mind began to race with possibilities. Had I forgotten to lock the door before going to bed? I couldn't imagine I had. It was a routine I'd followed for years, making sure everything was secure before I settled in for the night. And yet, here I was, standing in front of an open door, unsure of what had happened. I stepped back inside and closed the door behind me, locking it with a firm click. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing in the hallway watching me. But the house remained silent. I checked the other doors and windows, double-checking that everything was secure. Everything appeared to be in order, no signs of forced entry, no disturbances. But the open door lingered in my thoughts, gnawing at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. That there was a reason why the door had been left open, a reason why I hadn't heard anything during the night. I walked to the living room and sat on the couch, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Could it have been the wind? but I had never known the wind to open a door like that, not so wide and without any sound. I sat there for what felt like hours, my thoughts circling endlessly. I tried to rationalize it, but the truth was, I couldn't explain it. There was no way for someone to have entered my house without me hearing them, not without leaving any signs behind. And yet, the door had been left wide open, as if inviting someone in. It felt like I was missing a piece of the puzzle, and I couldn't figure out what it was. Later that afternoon, I decided to go through the house one more time, checking for anything unusual. I walked slowly from room to room, inspecting every corner, every closet. Everything seemed as it should be. No signs of forced entry, no unfamiliar objects or disturbances. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Why had the door been left open, and why hadn't I heard anything? I decided to check the security footage from the cameras I had set up around the house. Maybe there was something I had missed, something that would explain the open door. I grabbed my phone and opened the security app, scrolling through the video from the previous night. The footage showed me locking the door before going to bed, just as I always did. But then, something strange happened. The camera cut out for a few moments in the middle of the night, just long enough for someone to have entered the house. The footage resumed, but by then the door was wide open, just like it had been when I woke up. The cameras had picked up nothing, no sounds, no movement. It was as if whoever had opened the door had done it in complete silence. I couldn't understand how it was possible. The cameras had always been reliable before, and yet they had failed to capture anything out of the ordinary. The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. Who would do something like this? Why would someone come into my house and leave the door open without taking anything, without even leaving a trace? I felt like I was being watched, like someone was observing me from the shadows, but I couldn't find any evidence to support that feeling. I spent the next few days on edge, constantly checking the doors and windows, looking for any sign that someone had been inside. But everything remained as it should be. The door stayed locked, the house remained quiet, and yet the feeling of unease never left me. It was as if something or someone was waiting for me to figure it out. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make sense of it. One evening I was sitting in my living room, trying to relax after a long day when I heard a noise. It was faint but unmistakable, the sound of a door creaking open. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I quickly got up and rushed to the front door, but when I opened it, there was nothing. The porch was empty, the street silent. I stood there for a moment, my mind spinning, unsure of what to think. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was becoming paranoid. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in my house, watching me, waiting for me to uncover the truth. The mystery of the open door remained unsolved, but one thing was clear: I would never feel completely safe again. Not as long as I didn't know who or what had been standing on the other side of that door. Story 23. I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. I groggily picked it up, rubbing my eyes as I saw the notification from my security camera system. It was unusual for the system to alert me at this hour, especially after I had set it up to monitor for motion. I had been in bed for a few hours, and there was no reason for anyone to be near the house. With a slight sense of unease, I opened the notification to check the footage. As the video loaded, I saw a figure moving around my house, the camera capturing their every step. They were wearing a dark hoodie, their face obscured by shadows. The figure walked slowly, almost methodically, around the perimeter of my house. I squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was past 2 a.m., and there was no reason anyone should be near my house. My heart began to pound as I watched the figure linger near my back door, pausing for a moment before moving on. The movement was smooth, almost too smooth, like they knew exactly where to go. I checked the timestamp on the video. It had been recorded only a few minutes ago. My mind raced as I tried to process what I was seeing. Who was this person? Why were they walking around my house in the dead of night? My first instinct was to go outside and check, but my legs felt frozen, like my body was refusing to move. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm myself down. I had to be sure, and the only way to do that was to investigate. I grabbed my phone, my hand shaking slightly as I exited my bedroom and quietly walked toward the front door. I opened it slowly, the chill of the night air hitting my skin. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound being the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. I stepped outside, squinting into the darkness, my heart still racing in my chest. There was no sign of anyone, no footprints in the gravel, no rustling in the bushes. It was as if the figure had vanished into thin air. I walked around the house, my footsteps crunching on the grass. I checked the front yard, then the sides, and finally the backyard. Nothing. No signs of intrusion, no broken windows, nothing out of place. I felt a strange mix of confusion and anxiety. The figure had been on my security camera, but there was no trace of them now. Had I imagined it? Or was I just too scared to find anything? I went back inside and checked the footage again. I rewound the video to see if I had missed something, but there they were, walking around my house, as clear as day. It was hard to ignore the unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. I checked the other cameras around the house, each showing the same thing, nothing. The figure had only appeared on the one camera, the one near my back door. I tried to think rationally, to tell myself it could have been a glitch, but deep down I knew that wasn't the case. I sat down on the couch, trying to calm my nerves. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The figure had moved so deliberately, almost like they had a purpose. It was almost as if they knew exactly where the cameras were. My phone buzzed again, another notification from the security system. I opened it immediately, my heart jumping in my chest. This time there was no figure, just the usual footage of my empty yard. I checked the timestamp. It was from a few minutes after I had gone outside. I spent the rest of the night unable to sleep, my mind constantly replaying the strange footage. In the morning I reviewed the footage again, but there was nothing new. No signs of anyone in or around my house. My front door was still locked, the windows still secure. It was as if the figure had never been there. But I knew what I saw, and the unease in my chest refused to go away. Days went by, and nothing else unusual happened. I went about my daily routine, but the memory of that figure lingered in the back of my mind. I kept checking the footage, hoping to find some explanation, but there was nothing more to see. Then, one evening, as I sat down to dinner, my phone buzzed again. I picked it up, expecting another notification from the security system, but this time it was a message from an unknown number. The message was simple: I saw you. I stared at the words, my stomach sinking. I didn't know who it was, or how they had gotten my number, but the message felt like a warning. I felt a chill run down my spine as I thought about the figure from the night I had seen on the camera. Was it the same person who sent the message, or was this something entirely different? I quickly checked my security cameras again, scanning for any signs of movement, but there was nothing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was always one step ahead of me. I decided to take extra precautions, locking all my doors and windows every night, setting the alarm system, and checking the cameras regularly. But no matter what I did, the feeling of being watched never left. It wasn't until a week later that I noticed something new. One of the cameras near my back door had been tampered with. The lens was covered, and the camera itself was slightly askew. My blood ran cold as I realized that someone had been inside my yard, close enough to alter the camera's position without triggering the motion sensors. I checked the footage from the other cameras, but the tampering hadn't been recorded. The only footage I had was from the night the figure walked around my house. The figure, the phone message, the tampered camera, it was all too much to ignore. Someone had been watching me, someone who knew exactly where to go and how to avoid detection. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that the figure would return. I didn't know when or why, but I had a sinking suspicion that I was being followed, watched from the shadows. I decided to take further action, contacting local authorities. They agreed to investigate, but they had no leads. They told me it could be a prank, or maybe a glitch in the system, but something told me it was more than that. I kept the police updated, but it was hard to trust that they would find anything. In the meantime, I kept checking the security footage, trying to find some clue that would explain everything, but the mystery only deepened. Weeks passed without incident, and I started to feel like maybe the worst was over. But then, one evening, as I was sitting in the living room, I received another message from the same unknown number. This time it was a photo of my house, taken from the backyard, the very spot where the figure had stood in the video. The photo was grainy, but it was unmistakable. It was my house, and it had been taken only hours ago. The figure hadn't gone away. They were still out there, still watching, and now they were getting closer. Story 24. I found a strange envelope in my mailbox, and inside was a picture of my childhood home. The image was old, faded, and the edges were frayed as if it had been sitting in a forgotten drawer for years. I didn't recognize the handwriting on the envelope or the postmark. It was as if the sender didn't want to be identified. The picture itself wasn't particularly remarkable. It showed the house as it had been when I was young, with the large oak tree in the front yard and the old swing hanging from its branches. But as I stared at it, something about the picture sent a chill down my spine. It felt wrong, like something was off. I turned the photo over, expecting to find some clue, some note explaining why it had been sent. There was nothing. No message, no signature, just the stark emptiness of the back. The more I looked at the picture, the more I felt like I was being watched, like someone was standing behind me, observing my every move. I shook the feeling off, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the unease that was beginning to settle in my chest. I walked inside and sat down at the kitchen table, the picture still in my hands. My thoughts raced. How did someone get a picture of my childhood home? I hadn't lived there in years, and I hadn't spoken to anyone from my past in months. The house had been sold a long time ago, and I hadn't been back since. There was no logical explanation for how this photo could have found its way to me. I tried to brush it off, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. It was as if someone knew things about me, about my past, that I hadn't shared with anyone. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like my privacy had been violated in a way I couldn't understand. I couldn't shake the feeling that the photo wasn't just a random thing, that there was some deeper purpose behind it, something that was meant to get my attention. I decided to call my old neighbor, someone who had lived next door to my childhood home for as long as I could remember. Maybe they had seen something, or maybe they knew something about the photo. When they answered the phone, I asked if they had sent anything strange, or if they knew anything about the picture. They were confused at first, then told me they hadn't sent anything and hadn't seen anything unusual. The conversation ended quickly, and I was left feeling even more unsettled. I spent the rest of the evening pacing around my house, the image of the childhood home lingering in my mind. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows watching me. But when I checked, there was nothing. Still, the feeling didn't go away. I couldn't shake the thought that whoever sent the photo knew more about me than they should. I tried to convince myself it was just a harmless prank, but deep down I knew it was more than that. Later that night, as I was about to turn in for bed, I heard a faint noise coming from outside. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, like someone was walking around my house. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I moved cautiously to the window, peeking out through the blinds, but there was nothing there. No one in sight. The street was empty, the only sound the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. I tried to calm myself, but the sense of unease refused to leave. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the windows made me jump. I kept checking the locks on the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. But the nagging feeling remained, like I was being watched, like I wasn't alone. It was as if the photo, the envelope, and the footsteps outside were all connected, pulling me deeper into something I didn't understand. The next morning, I decided to visit my childhood home. It wasn't far, just a short drive, but I hadn't been back in years. Maybe seeing the place again would help calm my nerves, help me make sense of what was happening. As I drove down the familiar streets, memories flooded back, playing in the yard, climbing the oak tree, running through the house with my siblings. It had once been a place of comfort, a place where I felt safe. When I arrived, I parked on the street and got out of the car. The house looked exactly the same, though it felt strangely different now. The new owners had made some changes, but the essence of the place was still there. I stood in front of the gate, staring at the house, wondering why I had come. What was I hoping to find? I walked up the driveway, my footsteps echoing in the quiet street. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. There was a new security camera on the porch, pointing directly at the front door. I hadn't seen it before. It was out of place, and it made me feel even more uneasy. I couldn't explain why, but I had the feeling that the camera had been put there recently, after I had received the photo. I stood there for a few moments, wondering if I should go inside and ask the new owners about the camera, but I hesitated. Something about the whole situation felt off, like I was intruding, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I turned around and walked back to my car, the sense of unease following me every step of the way. That evening, as I sat in my living room, the photo on the front of me, I began to piece together the fragments of the mystery. The picture of my childhood home, the strange envelope, the feeling of being watched, the footsteps outside, all of it seemed connected. But to what? And why? I didn't know the answers, but I couldn't shake the sense that this was just the beginning. I decided to keep the photo, the envelope, and the feeling of dread to myself. Maybe it was just a coincidence, a random event that would fade away in time. But deep down, I knew that something was coming, something that I wasn't prepared for. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that whoever had sent the photo was still out there, still watching, waiting for the right moment to make their presence known. I tried to ignore it, tried to move on with my life, but the thought of the photo, the envelope, and the mysterious figure in the shadows never left my mind. It was always there, lurking, a constant reminder that some mysteries were never meant to be solved. And as the days passed, I couldn't help but wonder just how far the reach of this unknown person extended, and whether I was truly safe or just another pawn in their twisted game. Story